Confucius, the guy who talked about harmony. Confucius, the renowned Chinese philosopher and teacher, has left behind a legacy that still influences societies today. He was born in 551 BCE in the little state of Lu, right in the middle of a pretty chaotic time in ancient China, both socially and politically. Amid all the chaos, he saw a way to bring everything together in harmony. Confucius was really curious about the world from a young age. Even though his family had noble roots, they weren't exactly rolling in money. He tried out different jobs before finally diving into what he really loved: teaching. He thought education could really make a difference for both people and society, which was quite a bold idea back then. Confucius wasn't about writing books or chasing power. He was all about teaching and sharing knowledge. His teachings were later put together by his disciples in a work known as the Analects. They really emphasized things like morality, loyalty to family, respect for tradition, and the significance of kind leadership. So, these values, which we call Confucianism, have really influenced the ethical foundation of East Asia for a long time. He would often say, "Don't do to others what you wouldn't want done to you," which is a straightforward but deep idea about respecting one another. His wisdom wasn't just about deep thoughts. It provided real advice for living a good life. Confucius really highlighted how important rituals, good governance, and self-discipline are for bringing harmony to families and nations alike. Even with all his deep thoughts, Confucius didn't get the recognition he deserved while he was alive. A lot of rulers seemed to care more about gaining power than actually governing ethically. Still, he never lost his determination. He traveled around different Chinese states for years, sharing his ideas for a better society. So, Confucius made his way back to Lu. And there he kept on teaching right up until he passed away in 479 BCE. Even though he didn't get to see his ideas really take off, his philosophy ended up being one of the most impactful ways of thinking in human history. Confucius wasn't a king or a conqueror. He didn't have a sword or a crown. His teachings really changed cultures and societies, showing that the strength of ideas can be more powerful than any empire. These days, people think of Confucius not only as a philosopher, but also as someone who shows us how to live with virtue, respect, and harmony. Johannes Gutenberg, the inventor who changed everything. Johannes Gutenberg, the brilliant mind behind the printing press, really changed the game in history. Gutenberg was born around 1400 in Mainz, Germany, and his amazing invention really transformed how people share knowledge. Gutenberg was raised in a time when books were painstakingly written by hand, which made them quite costly and hard to come by. It was really only the wealthiest who could get their hands on them, and knowledge was usually kept just for the elite. Gutenberg really had this amazing vision, a world where ideas could just flow freely, reaching everyone, no matter their wealth or status. In about 1440, Gutenberg made this idea a reality by inventing the movable type printing press. He came up with a cool system using individual metal letters that could be rearranged. It turned out to be faster, cheaper, and way more efficient than the old-school methods. His masterpiece is the Gutenberg Bible, printed in the 1450s, which amazed everyone with its precision and beauty. This wasn't just a cool tech advancement, it was a game changer for our culture. Gutenberg's press really changed the game by making knowledge accessible to everyone, which helped spark the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the scientific revolution. For the first time, ideas could spread quickly, crossing borders and reaching people from all walks of life. The printing press was like the internet back in the day, bringing people together through books, pamphlets, and newspapers. But Gutenberg had his fair share of challenges in life. He faced some tough financial challenges, and in the end, he ended up losing control of his printing press to his business partner. Even with those challenges, his invention kept going strong and really made an impact on the modern world. Johannes Gutenberg might not have been a conqueror or a ruler, but what he did was even more amazing. He gave us the chance to share ideas, keep knowledge alive, and inspire countless generations. Today, he's definitely recognized as a trailblazer who really made a difference in history. Gautama Buddha, the one who found enlightenment, Gautama Buddha, originally named Siddhartha Gautama, was born in 563 BCE as a prince. He chose to leave behind a life of luxury to seek enlightenment. His teachings laid the groundwork for one of the world's most significant spiritual traditions, Buddhism. Siddhartha came into the world in Lumbini, which is close to what we now call Nepal. And he was born into a royal family. He lived in luxury, away from the struggles of everyday life. Everything shifted for him when, as a young man, he stepped beyond the palace walls and encountered suffering for the first time: an old man, a sick person, and a corpse. This great renunciation had him stepping away from his royal life to seek answers to some of life's biggest questions. After years of exploring, embracing a tough lifestyle, and meditating under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, Siddhartha finally found enlightenment. He came to understand the Four Noble Truths, which are central to Buddhist teachings. Life involves suffering. Suffering comes from desire. We can overcome desire, and following the Eightfold Path leads to liberation. The Buddha dedicated the rest of his life to sharing his teachings throughout India. He really focused on self-discovery and taking responsibility for oneself, which sets him apart from a lot of religious figures. He shared lessons on compassion, mindfulness, and how crucial it is to live in harmony with everyone around us. His philosophy focused more on discovering inner peace and enlightenment rather than worshiping gods. Gautama Buddha passed away around 483 BCE, and his legacy has really stood the test of time and crossed many borders. Buddhism made its way across Asia and even further, leaving a mark on cultures, philosophies, and the lives of many people. The story of the Buddha really reminds us that real wealth isn't about what we own. It's more about grasping the essence of life and finding balance both inside ourselves and in the world around us. Napoleon Bonaparte, the genius behind modern warfare. Napoleon Bonaparte was quite the character. He started from pretty modest beginnings and ended up taking charge of Europe. It's fascinating how he became one of the most clever military strategists in history. Napoleon was born in 1769 on the island of Corsica, and growing up during a time of political turmoil really influenced his keen mind and strong drive. Napoleon showed a knack for strategy from a young age. He started military school at just 9 years old and quickly climbed the ranks thanks to his sharp mind and determination. By the time he hit his early 20s, he had already made a name for himself as a military whiz. Napoleon's rise to fame kicked off in 1799 when he pulled off a coup to take control in France, naming himself first consul. His leadership really helped bring some stability to a nation that was shaken up by revolution. Napoleon wasn't just happy ruling France. He wanted to change the whole of Europe. Napoleon was truly one of a kind as a commander. His campaigns, whether in Italy or Egypt, really highlighted his clever tactics and knack for outsmarting much bigger armies. When he was at the peak of his influence, he set up the French Empire and crowned himself emperor back in 1804. He spread the ideas of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, and fraternity throughout the continent. But Napoleon was more than just a military leader. He was a reformer who really changed the way governance worked. His Napoleonic Code is a collection of civil laws that really changed the game for legal systems and still has a big impact around the world today. He brought in changes to education, infrastructure, and administration that really shaped modern France. But in the end, his ambition was what brought him down. The disastrous invasion of Russia in 1812 really kicked off his downfall. So, Napoleon ended up facing a bunch of European powers. And in the end, he was defeated and sent off to the island of Elba. He made a big comeback in 1815. But his time in power wrapped up at the Battle of Waterloo. So, Napoleon ended up spending his last years in exile on this pretty isolated island called St. Helena. And he passed away there in 1821. Napoleon Bonaparte's legacy is a mix of triumph and tragedy. He was a guy full of contradictions. Some saw him as a liberator, while others viewed him as a conqueror. It's hard to argue against the huge influence he had on Europe and beyond. Napoleon's life really shows us how high human ambition can soar and what it can cost when we reach for too much. Jesus Christ, the Savior who made a difference in the world. So, Jesus Christ, right? He was just a humble carpenter from Nazareth, but he ended up being one of the most influential figures in all of human history. He was born in Bethlehem around 4 BCE, and his life and teachings really set the stage for Christianity, a faith that billions of people around the world embrace today. Jesus was raised in a humble family in Galilee, which was under Roman control. He showed a lot of wisdom and kindness from a young age. In his 30s, Jesus kicked off his ministry, journeying through Judea and sharing messages about love, forgiveness, and the kingdom of God. He focused more on inner transformation rather than just the rituals that the religious leaders of his time were all about. One of Jesus' key messages was both simple and deep. Love your neighbor as yourself. He shared stories and performed wonders, connecting with folks from all backgrounds, bringing hope to those in need, and pushing back against the powerful. Word got around about how he healed the sick, fed the hungry, and calmed storms, and soon enough, huge crowds were showing up wherever he went. Jesus' teachings were more than just spiritual. They were truly revolutionary. He talked about equality in a world split by class and power. His message of unconditional love and forgiveness really struck a chord. But it also stirred up some opposition from the religious and political leaders of his time. So, during a time when things were getting pretty tense, Jesus got arrested, put on trial, and ultimately crucified around 30 CE. For his followers, it felt like the dream had come to an end with his death. So, in Christian belief, Jesus came back to life 3 days later, and this event is celebrated as the foundation of Christianity, Easter. His resurrection turned into a symbol of hope and redemption for all of us. The message of Jesus Christ reached well beyond Judea, thanks to his disciples and later on, people like Paul the Apostle who helped share it. Over the years, Christianity has grown into one of the major religions around the globe, influencing cultures, ethics, and civilizations along the way. These days, people think of Jesus not only as a religious figure, but also as a symbol of love, sacrifice, and compassion. His life and message still inspire so many people to aim for kindness, understanding, and making the world a better place. Karl Marx, the guy who shaped modern socialism. Karl Marx was a groundbreaking thinker who introduced socialism and communism, shaking up the world with ideas that went against the norm. Marx was born in Trier, Germany, in 1818, and he experienced a period of significant social and economic change as he grew up. His groundbreaking ideas ended up inspiring movements all around the world. Marx started his intellectual journey at the University of Bonn and then moved on to the University of Berlin, where he explored philosophy, history, and economics. That's where he really got into figuring out what makes human society tick. But it wasn't only about academic interest. Marx really cared about the struggles of the working class. Back in 1844, Marx crossed paths with Friedrich Engels, who would become a lifelong collaborator and friend. They teamed up to create some really influential pieces in political thought, like the Communist Manifesto back in 1848. This revolutionary piece urged for a change in the capitalist systems, promoting a society where workers, rather than elites, would have control over the means of production. Marx believed that history is all about class struggle, which is basically the constant fight between those in power and those who are not. He thought that capitalism, by prioritizing profit, led to inequality and alienation, which resulted in workers feeling exploited and dehumanized. His big work, Das Kapital, took a close look at capitalism and set up the ideas that support socialism. Even though Marx's ideas were pretty radical and stirred up some controversy, they really resonated with workers all around the globe. His idea of a society without classes, where everyone is treated fairly, really motivated labor movements and revolutions, especially in Russia back in 1917. Marxism really shaped the thinking of communist states in the 20th century, impacting leaders such as Lenin, Mao Zedong, and Fidel Castro. Even with all his smarts and accomplishments, Marx faced a lot of struggles in his personal life. He faced financial struggles and health issues, yet he stayed dedicated to his cause right up until his passing in 1883. He was laid to rest in Highgate Cemetery in London, and his grave features the well-known phrase, "Workers of all lands, unite." Karl Marx's ideas still spark conversations and influence political discussions today. Whether you're a fan or not, his take on capitalism and his ideas for a fair society still hit home today, just like they did back then. He wasn't just a philosopher. He was a revolutionary thinker who had the guts to envision a different world. Alexander the Great, the conqueror who couldn't be stopped, Alexander the Great, known for his incredible conquests and ambition, was born in 356 BCE in Macedon to King Philip II and Queen Olympias. Right from the start, it felt like destiny had some amazing plans in store for him. Young Alexander learned from the great philosopher Aristotle, diving into philosophy, science, politics, and the art of leadership. The lessons he learned, along with tales of Homeric heroes, really sparked his ambition for greatness. By the time he was 16, Alexander was already leading armies, showing off his natural talent for strategy. Back in 336 BCE, things took a turn for the worse when Alexander's father was assassinated. At only 20 years old, Alexander took the throne. This ambitious young king didn't just want to rule Macedon. He had dreams of uniting the whole world. So, back in 334 BCE, Alexander kicked off his conquests by leading his army across the Hellespont and into Asia Minor. He showed incredible tactical skill when he took on the powerful Persian Empire, even facing off against King Darius III in battles like Issus and Gaugamela. Every win just made his name shine brighter as a military genius. His empire reached all the way from Greece to Egypt, Persia, and even parts of India, one of the biggest in history. But Alexander was more than just a conqueror. He was a leader with a big vision, always looking to mix different cultures together. He started more than 20 cities, with the famous Alexandria in Egypt being one of them, which turned into a center for learning and culture. Alexander really pushed for blending Greek and Persian traditions, creating a lasting legacy of cultural exchange. But his unyielding ambition really did have its price. So, back in 323 BCE, after all those intense campaigns, Alexander passed away in Babylon at the young age of 32. It's still a bit of a mystery how he died, with all sorts of theories floating around, from fever to poisoning. After he passed away, his empire was just too big for one person to manage, and it ended up breaking apart. Even so, you can't overlook the mark Alexander left on history. He shared Greek culture and ideas all over the known world, influencing civilizations for centuries. Alexander the Great wasn't just a conqueror. He was a real game changer who left a lasting mark on history. Thomas Edison, the Wizard of Menlo Park, Thomas Edison, often referred to as the Wizard of Menlo Park, really transformed our lives in a big way. Edison was born in 1847 in Milan, Ohio, and interestingly, he didn't have a formal education. His curious mind and relentless determination really set him apart as one of the greatest inventors of all time. Edison had quite the challenging journey. When he was a kid, people called him a troublemaker because he just couldn't stop asking questions. But you know what? That curiosity turned into his superpower. By the time he hit his teens, he was already on the job as a telegraph operator, diving into tech experiments whenever he could. He viewed every failure not as a setback, but as a step toward success. And this mindset really shaped his career. How about we take a step back to the late 1870s? Edison, already a well-known inventor, had this dream to light up the world. So, back in 1879, after a ton of experiments, he finally brought the electric light bulb to life. This invention didn't just light up homes. It really kicked off the electrical revolution, transforming how cities and industries functioned. Edison definitely had more than just one big success. He had more than 1,000 patents, covering everything from the phonograph, which was the start of modern music players, to motion picture technology, setting the stage for the entertainment industry. His Menlo Park lab turned into a hub of innovation, drawing in bright minds and encouraging collaboration to solve tricky challenges. But Edison's journey to greatness had its fair share of controversy. The rivalry between him and Nikola Tesla over electrical systems, direct current DC versus alternating current AC, is pretty legendary. Even though AC came out on top for powering cities, Edison's DC system laid the groundwork for other uses. Edison really stood out because he had this knack for turning ideas into practical inventions. Even with all the competition around, he really knew how to get what people needed and figured out the best ways to make it happen. Thomas Edison died in 1931, but his legacy is still very much alive. The light bulb really turned into this awesome symbol of innovation, and his contributions still inspire inventors and dreamers all over the world. Edison didn't just come up with cool gadgets. He really helped shape a brighter, more connected future for everyone. Isaac Newton, the brilliant mind that shaped our understanding of the universe. Isaac Newton was born on Christmas Day in 1642, and he really changed how we see the world around us. Growing up in the countryside of Lincolnshire, England, Newton didn't really stand out as a genius when he was younger. His endless curiosity would turn him into one of the greatest minds in human history. Newton's journey of brilliance kicked off at Cambridge University, where he dived into mathematics, physics, and astronomy. His curiosity and love for understanding nature drove him to make some amazing discoveries. So, back in 1665 during the Great Plague, when the university shut down, Newton really hit his stride. He referred to that time as his Annus Mirabilis, or Year of Wonders. Pretty fascinating, right? So, there's this story about Newton, right? One day, he just happened to see an apple fall from a tree. This everyday moment led to an amazing idea: gravity. When Newton figured out that the same force making the apple fall was also what kept the planets circling around, it really changed the game for science. Back in 1687, he put out this huge book called Principia Mathematica, where he explained the laws of motion and universal gravitation. Newton was more than just a physicist. He was a mathematician who came up with calculus. But it wasn't without its fair share of controversy. His rivalry with German mathematician Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz about who came up with calculus first became quite well known, showing just how competitive Newton really was. Aside from his work in mathematics and physics, Newton also explored optics and discovered how light can be divided into a range of colors. He played around with prisms and lenses, and that really laid the groundwork for modern optics. Newton's life had its fair share of quirks, that's for sure. Even though he was a scientific genius, he had a real fascination with alchemy and theology, dedicating years to interests that felt pretty far from his groundbreaking discoveries. Newton reached the impressive age of 84, which was quite remarkable for his era. In 1705, Queen knighted him, and he became known as Sir Isaac Newton, a true symbol of human intellect and achievement. His contributions really set the stage for centuries of scientific progress and totally changed the way we see the universe. Newton didn't just explain how things work. He also equipped us with the tools to dig deeper, making him a real giant in history. Charles Darwin, the man who redefined life. Charles Darwin was born on February 12, 1809, in Shrewsbury, England. He's known as the revolutionary thinker who changed how we understand life forever. When he was a young boy, Darwin really enjoyed exploring nature, collecting beetles, and just taking in everything around him. He had no idea that his love for nature would eventually spark one of the most important scientific theories ever. Darwin's adventure really took off when he hopped on the HMS Beagle in 1831 for a 5-year trip around the world. This trip was more than just a fun adventure. It really opened my eyes. While in the Galapagos Islands, he noticed finches that had various beak shapes, each one suited to the food available on their particular islands. These observations sparked his groundbreaking idea. Back in 1859, Darwin came out with his well-known book, On the Origin of Species. The book talks about natural selection, which is basically the idea that species change over time as the traits that help them survive get handed down from one generation to the next. That was quite a daring statement that really pushed against the religious and social norms of the era. Darwin wasn't just a scientist. He was someone who really paid attention to detail. He spent years diving into the study of plants, animals, and fossils, gathering all sorts of evidence to back up his theory. Even with all the debate around his ideas, Darwin kept his eye on the prize, believing that the evidence really did tell the story. Darwin's contributions didn't just shake things up in biology. They really changed it into a modern science. His work sparked the development of evolutionary biology and genetics, impacting so many scientists who came after him. But Darwin was quite a humble guy who usually steered clear of public debates. He liked the peace of his home, putting in a lot of effort in his study. Even though his health took a hit over the years, he never lost his determination. Charles Darwin died in 1882 and was laid to rest in Westminster Abbey, which really shows the mark he left on humanity. His theory of evolution really influences how we see life on Earth, showing us that we're all linked through the complex web of nature. Darwin was more than just a thinker. He was a trailblazer whose curiosity changed the narrative of life itself. Plato, the thinker who influenced Western ideas. Plato was born around 427 BCE in Athens, Greece, and he's definitely one of the greatest philosophers in history. Plato, who was a student of Socrates and later taught Aristotle, really shaped the groundwork for Western philosophy, politics, and education with his ideas. Plato started his journey as a thinker in a city-state that was balancing on the edge between democracy and tyranny. After being influenced by Socrates, he really got into exploring questions about ethics, justice, and what an ideal society would look like. Socrates' trial and execution back in 399 BCE really shook Plato up. It opened his eyes to the risks of political ignorance and made him realize how important it is to have wise leaders. Plato really wanted to keep his teacher's legacy alive and even build on it. So he started the academy in Athens. It became a spot where students could dive into philosophy, math, and the natural sciences. The academy is often seen as the first university in the world and was a shining light of knowledge for many centuries. Plato's dialogues dive into some really timeless questions. One of his most well-known pieces, The Republic, brought up this interesting concept of the philosopher king. Basically a leader who's all about wisdom and reason instead of just chasing after power or wealth. In this perfect society, justice was the norm, and everyone pitched in based on what they could do best. Plato's theory of forms was quite a groundbreaking idea. He suggested that the physical world is merely a reflection of a deeper, unchanging reality. A physical chair might not be perfect, but the concept of what a chair is exists in this ideal, abstract space. The difference between the material and the ideal keeps shaping philosophy, art, and science. Plato wasn't just a thinker. He was also a storyteller. With characters like Socrates, he encouraged readers to challenge their assumptions and explore deeper truths. His work was meant for everyone, not just the intellectuals. It was for anyone who was curious about the big questions in life. Plato died around 347 BCE, but his impact is still felt today. His ideas have influenced the works of many philosophers, like Augustine and Descartes, and they still spark discussions about politics, morality, and what it means to be human. Plato wasn't just about questioning things. He really thought about how to make the world a better place. His legacy really shows how ideas can shape civilization in such powerful ways. Queen Elizabeth I, the monarch who shaped a time period. Queen Elizabeth I, who was born in 1533, led England with both brilliance and resilience during a really tumultuous time. She's often called the Virgin Queen, and her time on the throne from 1558 to 1603 really defined the English Renaissance and set the stage for what would become the British Empire. Elizabeth, the daughter of King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, had a pretty tumultuous start to her life. Growing up, she was always on edge because of her mother's execution and the crazy political scene at the Tudor court. But you know what? Those challenges just made her even more determined and really honed her smarts. Elizabeth took the throne at just 25, stepping into a country that was split by religion and still feeling the effects of war. Her first challenge was bringing her people together. With the Elizabethan religious settlement, she set up the Church of England, finding a middle ground between Catholic and Protestant groups. Her down-to-earth approach won her the loyalty of many, even during times of political tension. But Elizabeth wasn't just good at politics, she really knew how to strategize. One of her biggest wins happened in 1588 when her navy took down the Spanish Armada, which really put England on the map as a maritime power. Her leadership during this crisis really boosted her reputation as a fearless and capable ruler. The Elizabethan age was more than just politics. It was a time of cultural brilliance. During her time, England experienced the emergence of literary greats like William Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe, among others. England really became a center for creativity and innovation. With the arts thriving all around, Elizabeth's personal life was just as intriguing as her time on the throne. Even with plenty of admirers and all the political pressure to tie the knot, she decided to stay single, saying she was married to her kingdom instead. She was known as the Virgin Queen, which really highlighted her independence and commitment to her people. Queen Elizabeth I died in 1603, marking the end of the Tudor dynasty. But her legacy is still very much alive. She left England feeling stronger, more united, and ready to make an impact on the world stage. Elizabeth was more than just a queen. She was a leader who really inspired loyalty, creativity, and progress. Her time in power is still one of the most talked about parts of history. George Washington, the dad of his nation, George Washington, the first president of the United States, is often referred to as the father of his country. He was born in Virginia in 1732 and came from pretty humble beginnings. Over time, he became a symbol of courage, leadership, and unity. playing a key role in shaping the foundation of America. Washington had a disciplined upbringing and a solid work ethic from a young age. When he was younger, he took on the role of a surveyor, venturing into unknown territories. This adventurous role really helped him build resilience and deepened his love for the land he would eventually fight to free. Back in 1754, Washington kicked off his military journey during the French and Indian War, and he soon became known for his bravery and smart strategies. It was really during the Revolutionary War that Washington's leadership stood out. So, in 1775, he was appointed as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. And let me tell you, he had a lot on his plate. There were huge challenges like not having enough resources, dealing with brutal winters, and an army that really needed more experience. Still, he never lost his determination. You know, the victory at Yorktown in 1781 was a big deal. That's when Washington's forces took down the British, and it really changed the game. It not only helped America gain its independence, but also turned Washington into a hero. After the war, Washington had an even bigger task ahead: creating a nation. Back in 1789, he was chosen unanimously to be the very first president of the United States. During his 2 terms, he established some important precedents, like the peaceful transfer of power and building a strong federal government. In his farewell address, he cautioned us about the dangers of political divisions and getting too involved with foreign affairs, advice that still holds true even today. Centuries later, even with all his power and popularity, Washington turned down the idea of becoming a king. He was a firm believer in democracy and thought that no single person should have too much power. Once he retired to his cherished Mount Vernon, he kept inspiring everyone as a true symbol of humility and dedication. George Washington died in 1799, but his legacy lives on. His leadership in the early days of America really set the stage for a country founded on freedom, unity, and resilience. He wasn't just a great leader. He was the kind of person you don't come across often in history, someone whose influence continues to shape the world even after he's left us. Aristotle, the philosopher who shaped the world. Aristotle, one of history's greatest minds, was a thinker whose ideas have really stood the test of time. Aristotle was born in 384 BCE in Stagira, a little town in ancient Greece. His impact reaches across philosophy, science, politics, and ethics, making him a key figure in Western thought. When he was a young man, Aristotle made his way to Athens and became a part of Plato's academy. He spent almost 20 years learning from Plato, soaking up the principles of philosophy and shaping his own unique viewpoint along the way. Aristotle thought that the best way to understand the world was by observing it and using reason, which often put him at odds with some of his teacher's ideas. After Plato died, Aristotle decided to leave Athens and set off on a journey that would shape his legacy even more. Back in 343 BCE, he got the chance to tutor a young Alexander the Great. With Aristotle as his mentor, Alexander picked up lessons on leadership, ethics, and the natural sciences, insights that would shape his future conquests. Aristotle really made his mark with his writings. He wrote about a variety of topics, including biology, physics, metaphysics, and politics. His way of logical reasoning, called syllogism, turned into a key part of scientific exploration. In his book Politics, Aristotle took a deep dive into how governments are structured, suggesting that a balanced system is key to fostering justice and stability. His ethics looked into what it really means to live a virtuous life, highlighting how crucial moderation is. Aristotle was endlessly curious. He sorted out plants and animals, setting the stage for biology to become a science. He looked at the skies and helped shape early astronomy, and his take on drama and poetry left a mark on literature for ages. Back in 335 BCE, Aristotle made his way back to Athens and set up the Lyceum, a place where students could dive into philosophy, science, and the arts. The Lyceum turned into a hub for intellectual ideas, drawing in scholars from all over the ancient world. Even though he was brilliant, Aristotle dealt with some criticism as he got older. After Alexander passed away, the political climate in Athens got pretty tense, and Aristotle decided to leave. He said he wouldn't let the city sin twice against philosophy, which was a nod to what happened to Socrates. Aristotle passed away in 322 BCE, yet his teachings have continued to resonate through the ages. His works really shaped medieval scholarship, had a big impact on the Renaissance, and people are still studying them today. Aristotle was more than just a philosopher. He was a truth seeker whose ideas really shaped a lot of what we know today. Muhammad, the prophet who changed the course of history, Muhammad, who started Islam, is seen as one of the most impactful people in history. So, Muhammad was born in 570 CE in Mecca, which was a busy trade city in Arabia. His life and teachings really changed the course of civilization and still influence over 1 billion people around the world today. Muhammad came into the world as part of the Quraysh tribe. But sadly, he lost his parents when he was still quite young. Growing up with his grandfather and uncle, he earned a reputation for being honest and having strong integrity, which led to him being called Al-Amin, the trustworthy. When he was younger, he was a merchant and ended up marrying Khadija, a successful businesswoman who really had his back. When Muhammad turned 40, everything in his life took a turn. So, there he was, meditating in a cave on Mount Hira, when he had this incredible first revelation from the angel Jibril, also known as Gabriel. The Quran, the holy book of Islam, came about through these revelations that unfolded over a span of 23 years. Muhammad had the important job of sharing God's message about believing in one God, promoting social justice, and showing compassion. In a world filled with tribal conflicts and inequality, Muhammad's teachings really shook things up. He encouraged people to worship one God, Allah, and highlighted how important charity, equality, and mercy are. But his message really ran into some strong resistance from the Quraysh leaders, who viewed it as a challenge to their authority. Back in 622 CE, Muhammad and his followers made their way to Medina, which we call the Hijra. This was the start of the Islamic calendar and the creation of the first Islamic state. In Medina, Muhammad took on the role of a spiritual leader and a statesman, bringing together warring tribes with the ideas of justice and faith. In the coming decade, Muhammad's impact really started to expand. He made his way back to Mecca in 630 CE, taking the city without conflict and cleansing the Kaaba to serve as the main place of worship for Islam. When Muhammad passed away in 632 CE, he had brought together a large part of the Arabian Peninsula under the banner of Islam. Muhammad's legacy goes way beyond just his military and political accomplishments. He really focused on education, social welfare, and human dignity, which set the stage for the golden age of Islam. That's when science, medicine, and art really took off. For his followers, Muhammad is seen as the last prophet, embodying humility, kindness, and wisdom. His life and teachings still inspire millions today, influencing the moral and spiritual landscape of our modern world. Albert Einstein, the brilliant mind that changed our world. Albert Einstein was one of those brilliant minds who really changed how we think about the universe. And his ideas still matter a lot today. He was born in 1879 in Ulm, Germany, and his journey from a curious young boy to a groundbreaking physicist really changed the way we think about science forever. Einstein's journey of thought started at a young age, driven by his curiosity about the wonders of the world around him. Even though he had a tough time with regular school, his curiosity and independent learning helped him really grasp mathematics and physics. His early love for exploring and discovering new things really sparked the innovative ideas that shaped his career. Back in 1905, while he was busy as a patent examiner in Switzerland, Einstein put out 4 really important papers in the Annalen der Physik. These papers, each bringing a fresh idea to physics, kicked off his journey into becoming a well-known intellectual figure worldwide. His well-known equation, E=mc², showed how mass and energy are connected, really shifting the way scientists think about matter. This time, commonly known as Einstein's Annus Mirabilis, or miracle year, changed the path of physics forever. Einstein's most famous theory, the theory of relativity, really changed the way we think about space, time, and gravity. In 1915, he published his general theory of relativity, which brought about the groundbreaking idea that gravity isn't just a force. It's actually a curvature of space-time itself. This idea really shook up centuries of scientific thinking and was later backed up by the bending of light around the sun, which solidified his status as one of the greatest scientists ever. Aside from his incredible work in science, Einstein was also a deep thinker and cared a lot about humanity. He was really vocal about his opposition to war, pushed for civil rights, and stood up for social justice. He really believed in the power of reason and moral responsibility, and that shaped his life in and out of the scientific community. Back in 1933, when the Nazi regime was rising in Germany, Einstein made the move to the United States, where he kept on with his theoretical physics work. He dedicated his life to exploring the mysteries of the universe, diving into quantum mechanics and chasing the idea of a unified theory that could explain all the forces in nature. Even though he never quite finished that ambitious quest, Albert Einstein passed away in 1955, but his legacy lives on in every corner of science. His theories really set the stage for modern physics, and his contributions still inspire scientists and thinkers everywhere. Einstein was more than just a physicist. He was a visionary who changed how we see the universe and our role in it. Leonardo da Vinci, the Renaissance genius who changed the game in art and science. Leonardo da Vinci was born in 1452 in Vinci, Italy, and he was a remarkable individual whose talents crossed many fields, including art, engineering, anatomy, and architecture. People often see him as one of the greatest thinkers ever, and his work still impacts a lot of different areas today. It was clear from a young age that da Vinci had some serious skills. While he was an apprentice in Florence, he really worked on his painting skills and soon started to get noticed for his amazing talent in capturing human emotions and details. Some of his most well-known pieces, like the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper, really highlight his incredible grasp of human emotion and perspective during the Renaissance. But da Vinci's brilliance wasn't just limited to painting. He tackled science and invention with a lot of enthusiasm, creating everything from flying machines to cutting-edge military gadgets. His notebooks are packed with sketches, observations, and scientific diagrams, showing a mind that didn't see any boundaries between art and science. He really dove into anatomy, spending time dissecting cadavers to get a better grasp of the human body. This hands-on approach opened up some amazing insights into how muscles work and how we move. Besides being an artist and scientist, da Vinci was also into engineering, architecture, and mathematics. He came up with designs for bridges, machines, and city planning that were really ahead of their time, even though a lot of them never got built while he was around. His knack for mixing scientific exploration with artistic flair really makes him stand out as a genuine Renaissance man. Leonardo's work really showed how dedicated he was to grasping the whole world around him. He had a way of seeing things that went beyond his time, blending a deep curiosity with an amazing knack for noticing and capturing the world around him. Even though he spent his later years in France, da Vinci's legacy as a polymath still inspires so many thinkers, artists, and inventors today, making him one of the most influential figures in history. Adolf Hitler, the leader who influenced the path of history. Adolf Hitler was born in 1889 in Austria and is known as one of the most notorious figures in history. As the head of Nazi Germany, his actions brought about the destruction of World War II and the atrocities of the Holocaust, altering the path of history forever. Hitler came to power by skillfully navigating political systems and tapping into the frustrations of a nation that was still dealing with the fallout from World War I. As the head of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, he took advantage of Germany's economic troubles and the unhappiness in society to rally a lot of support. His speeches, packed with nationalist themes and vows to bring back Germany's past greatness, really struck a chord with those eager for a shift. After coming to power, Hitler quickly tore down democratic institutions and set up a totalitarian regime. He put in place some pretty bold policies to grow German territory, which resulted in the invasion of Poland in 1939 and kicked off World War II. He believed in Aryan racial superiority and harbored hatred for Jews, Romani people, and other minorities, which led to the systematic genocide of 6 million Jews, a tragedy we now refer to as the Holocaust. Even though Hitler had some military wins at the start of the war, his strategic blunders, especially the invasion of the Soviet Union and declaring war on the United States, ultimately brought about Germany's defeat. He led with a blend of charm, cunning, and harshness, and his idea of a racially pure Europe resulted in a legacy filled with destruction and pain. In 1945, with Allied forces closing in on Berlin, Hitler ended his own life, marking the conclusion of his reign of terror. His legacy serves as a serious reminder of the risks that come with unchecked power, nationalism, and hatred. Hitler really changed the world in ways that still echo today, which is why he's considered one of history's most controversial and destructive leaders. Julius Caesar, the conqueror who changed the Roman Empire. Julius Caesar was born in 100 BCE in Rome. He was a military general, politician, and dictator, and his actions really changed the Roman Republic into the Roman Empire. His ambition, strategic brilliance, and reforms really shaped Rome's future and left a lasting mark on world history. Caesar had quite the interesting early life, filled with political maneuvering as he made his way through the tricky Roman political scene. He climbed the ranks of the Roman military pretty fast, showing off his leadership skills and tactical know-how. His conquest of Gaul from 58 to 50 BCE really stretched Rome's territory and turned him into one of the most celebrated military commanders in Roman history. But Caesar's power and popularity really stirred up some political tension. Back in 49 BCE, he made the bold move of crossing the Rubicon River with his army, going against the Senate's orders and throwing Rome into a civil war. He beat Pompey and his other rivals, which made him the one and only ruler of Rome. As a dictator, he made some big changes, like reorganizing the calendar, redistributing land, and providing support for those in need. Even though he was really popular, a lot of folks in the Senate were pretty worried about how much power Caesar had. So, back on the Ides of March in 44 BCE, a bunch of senators, worried he might turn into a tyrant, decided to assassinate him. His death threw Rome into more civil war. But it also signaled the end of the Roman Republic and the start of the Roman Empire, with Caesar's grandnephew, Octavian, who later became Augustus, stepping into power. Julius Caesar left behind a legacy filled with military victories, political changes, and a significant moment in history. His life and death marked the close of a chapter for Rome, paving the way for imperial rule and changing the landscape of the ancient world. Caesar's story is such a compelling tale of ambition, power, and all the twists and turns of political life. Mahatma Gandhi, the leader who guided India to freedom. Mahatma Gandhi was born in 1869 in Porbandar, India, and he played a key role in leading India to independence from British colonial rule. His idea of nonviolent resistance, known as satyagraha, really took off and became a strong influence for civil rights and freedom movements all around the globe. Gandhi started his journey studying law in London, and then he moved on to South Africa, where he took a stand against racial discrimination. Gandhi really started to shape his ideas about nonviolence and civil disobedience while he was in South Africa. These principles would go on to play a huge role in his efforts for India's independence. When he got back to India in 1915, he really stepped into the spotlight with the Indian National Congress and started rallying people for mass movements against British rule. Gandhi really believed in the power of truth and nonviolence when it came to resistance. He was behind a few notable campaigns, like the Salt March in 1930, where people protested against British salt taxes, and the Quit India movement in 1942, which pushed for India to gain its independence right away. He had this incredible knack for bringing together millions of people, no matter their caste or religion, to stand up against British oppression. It really showed his moral leadership and vision. Even though his methods were all about peace, they definitely came with their fair share of challenges. Gandhi found himself behind bars a few times, and his strong belief in nonviolent resistance often clashed with other leaders who preferred to take a more aggressive approach. Even so, his unwavering commitment to nonviolence and his passion for India's independence really earned him a lot of respect, both in India and around the world. Mahatma Gandhi was a key figure in India gaining its independence in 1947. His ideas about nonviolence and civil disobedience still inspired justice and equality movements all over the globe. Gandhi is often seen as the father of the Indian nation, representing peace, resilience, and the lasting strength of peaceful protest. William Shakespeare, the playwright who influenced literature. William Shakespeare was born in 1564 in Stratford-upon-Avon, England. He's often seen as the greatest playwright in the English language and one of the most influential figures in world literature. His works really stand out, grabbing the attention of audiences with their interesting characters, deep themes, and beautiful language. Shakespeare kicked off his journey as a playwright and poet in the late 16th century when he joined the Lord Chamberlain's Men, a well-known acting company in London. His plays, like Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, Macbeth, and Julius Caesar covered a lot of ground, mixing tragedies, comedies, histories, and romances. He really has a knack for capturing the complexities of human nature and diving into themes like love, ambition, power, and morality, which makes his work feel timeless. Shakespeare really changed the game with his use of language. He brought a ton of words and phrases into the English language, and many of them are still used all the time today. His amazing knack for both verse and prose, along with his talent for weaving captivating stories, really makes him stand out as a writer with unmatched skill. Shakespeare didn't just write amazing plays. He also played a huge role in shaping the English theater as we know it today. His works really brought characters to life and told stories in such a rich way that they took theater to a whole new level, influencing how drama was written and performed for centuries. William Shakespeare passed away in 1616, but his legacy continues to thrive through his plays and poetry. His plays are staged more often than those of any other playwright, and his deep dive into the human experience still connects with audiences everywhere. Shakespeare really has left a lasting mark on literature and culture, which is why he's often considered one of the greatest writers in history. Louis Pasteur, the scientist who changed medicine forever. Louis Pasteur was born in 1822 in Dole, France. He was a chemist and microbiologist, and his groundbreaking work really changed the game in medicine, microbiology, and public health. He's really famous for coming up with the germ theory of disease and for making vaccines that ended up saving millions of lives. Pasteur started his scientific journey in chemistry, and his work on fermentation really set the stage for all the amazing discoveries he made later on. He showed that microorganisms were behind fermentation, shaking up the old idea of spontaneous generation. This brought about his well-known germ theory, suggesting that tiny organisms were behind diseases, changing how folks viewed health and sickness. One of Pasteur's biggest contributions was coming up with pasteurization, which is a process that heats liquids to a certain temperature to eliminate harmful microorganisms. This discovery really boosted food safety and set the stage for improvements in refrigeration and modern sanitation. Pasteur really changed the game with his work on vaccination. Back in 1885, he created a vaccine for rabies that ended up saving the life of a young boy who had been bitten by a rabid dog. His research resulted in vaccines for anthrax and chicken cholera, which helped stop major outbreaks and brought him worldwide acclaim. Pasteur was all about science, but he didn't just stick to the lab. He put in a lot of effort to boost public health and stop infectious diseases from spreading. His discoveries really changed the game in medicine. They helped improve hygiene practices, introduced sterilization techniques, and deepened our understanding of infectious diseases, which ended up saving millions of lives. Louis Pasteur left behind a legacy filled with scientific breakthroughs and a commitment to helping others. His work in medicine and microbiology has really made a difference in public health, and people still associate his name with the battle against infectious diseases. Pasteur's work still inspires scientists and healthcare professionals today, and his discoveries play a big role in shaping modern medicine. Nikola Tesla, the inventor who energized the future. Nikola Tesla was born in 1856 in Smiljan, Croatia. He was an inventor, electrical engineer, and physicist, and his groundbreaking ideas played a huge role in shaping the modern world. His work in electrical engineering, wireless communication, and energy transmission still shapes technology today. Tesla got his start in electrical engineering at the Technical University of Graz, which really set the stage for all the amazing things he would go on to do. He spent a few years in Europe before heading to the United States, where he teamed up with Thomas Edison. But Tesla had a different vision than Edison, which led him to create the alternating current AC system. This system eventually became the go-to standard for electrical power transmission all over the world. Tesla's AC system made it possible to send electricity over long distances much more efficiently compared to Edison's direct current DC system, which had its drawbacks. His inventions, like the induction motor, transformer, and Tesla coil, were super important in shaping electrical power systems and telecommunications. Tesla's creativity went far beyond just electricity. He had this dream about wireless communication and imagined a world where energy could just flow without any wires getting in the way. He worked on wireless power transmission and ended up creating the Wardenclyffe Tower, which was set up to send energy through the air. even though the tower didn't get finished. Tesla's ideas really set the stage for today's wireless tech, like radio, TV, and the internet. Tesla's legacy is all about being a visionary who really pushed the limits of science and technology. His inventions really changed the game for the modern world. From the electricity that lights up our homes to the wireless devices we rely on every day. Nikola Tesla had his fair share of financial ups and downs during his life, and he passed away without much recognition. Still, his contributions are so significant that they keep him in the spotlight as one of history's key inventors. Martin Luther King Jr., the leader who stood up for equality. Martin Luther King Jr. was born in 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. He was a Baptist minister and a social activist, and he became the most prominent leader of the American civil rights movement. His dedication to nonviolent resistance and his dream of a racially integrated society really shifted the direction of American history and sparked justice movements all over the globe. King's path to leadership kicked off in the 1950s when he got involved in the Montgomery bus boycott. So, after Rosa Parks got arrested for not giving up her seat to a white passenger, King stepped in to help lead the boycott. It went on for more than a year and ended up desegregating Montgomery's public transportation system. This was the start of King becoming a national figure in the fight for civil rights. King's approach to activism was all about nonviolence, drawing inspiration from Mahatma Gandhi. He thought that peaceful protests and civil disobedience could lead to change without having to turn to violence. He played a key role in setting up peaceful marches, sit-ins, and boycotts, all focused on tackling racial segregation and discrimination. One of King's most famous moments happened in 1963 when he delivered his "I Have a Dream" speech at the Lincoln Memorial, in front of a huge crowd of supporters. He shared his vision for a future where people would be judged by who they are on the inside, not by the color of their skin. This speech really marked a turning point in the civil rights movement and is still considered one of the most memorable speeches in American history. King worked hard, and it all paid off with the passing of important laws like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Even with all the challenges and time behind bars, King stayed true to his vision of equality and justice for everyone. It's really sad that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968, but his legacy is still very much alive. His work really set the stage for the civil rights wins of the 20th century, and his dream of a fair and equal society still motivates folks who are standing up for human rights and social justice everywhere. Abraham Lincoln, the leader who kept the Union together. Abraham Lincoln was born in 1809 in a log cabin in Kentucky, and he's often thought of as one of America's greatest presidents. He guided the country through its Civil War and kept the Union intact, all while putting an end to slavery, a pivotal moment in American history that influenced the nation's future. Lincoln's journey to power really showed how dedicated he was to democracy and equality. He taught himself law and went on to serve in the Illinois state legislature and the U.S. House of Representatives before becoming the 16th president in 1860. Back then, the country was really split on things like slavery and states' rights, and Lincoln had the huge task of keeping the Union together while tensions were rising. When the Southern states decided to secede from the Union and create the Confederacy, Lincoln wasn't about to let them tear the country apart. He thought that keeping the Union together was super important, and his leadership during the Civil War really made a difference. He put in a lot of effort to make sure the Union won, all while juggling the demands of the war and the important principles of freedom. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 was a game changer in the Civil War, stating that all slaves in areas controlled by the Confederacy were free. This brave move didn't just hurt the Confederacy. It also paved the way for the eventual end of slavery with the 13th Amendment in 1865. Lincoln really stood out as a leader because he was humble, empathetic, and had a strong faith in democracy. He put in the effort to mend the nation's wounds after the war, giving speeches such as his second inaugural address, where he urged for malice toward none and charity for all. It's really sad that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in 1865, just a few days after the Confederate surrender. But his legacy is still very much alive. His leadership kept the United States together and guided the nation toward a fairer and more equal society. Lincoln's influence still feels strong today, representing integrity, courage, and the lasting strength of democracy. Christopher Columbus, the explorer who discovered the Americas. Christopher Columbus was born in 1451 in Genoa, Italy. He was an explorer, and his journeys across the Atlantic Ocean resulted in the European discovery of the Americas. His journeys were a game changer in history, paving the way for Europeans to explore and settle in the New World. However, they also brought about serious and often harmful effects for the indigenous people. Columbus set off on his journey convinced that if he sailed west, he could find a way to Asia and open up direct trade routes to the east. After years of looking for support for his plan, he finally got the backing of Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Spain. So, back in 1492, Columbus embarked on his journey with 3 ships, the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Nina. So, on October 12th, 1492, Columbus touched down on an island in the Bahamas, thinking he had finally made it to the East Indies, even though he never actually landed on the mainland of North America. Columbus showing up in the Caribbean is seen as one of those really important moments in world history. His journeys paved the way for more exploration and eventually led to European powers colonizing the Americas. Even though there was a lot of excitement at first about the discovery, Columbus's interactions with the indigenous people ended up being filled with violence, enslavement, and exploitation. His voyages left behind a mixed legacy, sparking debate because they played a role in the decline of native populations and kicked off centuries of colonization in the Americas. People often have different opinions about Columbus's role in history. His journeys opened up new trade routes and allowed for the exchange of goods, cultures, and ideas between the Old World and the New World. However, they also set the stage for colonization and the hardships faced by indigenous peoples. His exploration really changed the world, and people still talk about his impact today. Diving into discussions and thoughts about historical progress and what it all means. Genghis Khan, the Mongol emperor who made a big impact on the world. Genghis Khan, originally named Temujin, came into the world in 1162 amidst the tough landscapes of Mongolia. He went on to establish the Mongol Empire, which turned out to be the biggest continuous empire ever seen in history. His story really showcases incredible resilience, military smarts, and a drive that just won't quit. Genghis Khan started off with very little, but he ended up leading an empire that stretched all the way from Eastern Europe to China. It really shows what a strong leader he was and how far his vision took him. Temujin had a tough start in life. When his father got poisoned by a rival clan, his family had to figure things out on their own in a tough and unforgiving world. Even with all these challenges, Temujin's leadership skills started to shine through. He brought together the scattered Mongol tribes, using a mix of diplomacy and force. In 1206, he was named Genghis Khan, which means universal ruler, and he kicked off an extraordinary military campaign to grow his empire. Genghis Khan had some really innovative military tactics. He changed the game in warfare by bringing in strategies like psychological warfare, pretending to retreat, and fighting with cavalry. His soldiers were really good at horseback riding and were super disciplined, which made them a tough match for much bigger and better equipped foes. Genghis Khan's army was more than just a fighting force. It was a highly organized group with intricate communication methods and smart strategies that helped them take over large areas. During Genghis Khan's time, the Mongol Empire grew quickly, taking over a lot of Central Asia, the Middle East, and some areas in Eastern Europe. He took down the Khwarezmian Empire, invaded the Jin dynasty, and sacked cities such as Samarkand and Baghdad. But Genghis Khan's empire building wasn't just about military strength. He was a leader with a clear vision who really got how crucial trade, communication, and governance are. He was all about promoting religious tolerance, inviting scholars from various cultures, and pushing for the development of infrastructure such as roads and postal systems. One of the things Genghis Khan is really known for is the Pax Mongolica, which was a time of relative peace throughout Eurasia. This stability made it easier to exchange goods, ideas, and technologies, like gunpowder, printing, and silk production. It also boosted trade along the Silk Road, linking Europe with the East and encouraging cultural exchanges. Genghis Khan's legacy is quite intricate. Even though his conquests caused a lot of destruction, they also helped in sharing ideas and advancing civilizations. His leadership, vision, and knack for bringing together different tribes really set him apart as one of the most influential figures in world history. leaving a lasting impact on both the East and West. Sigmund Freud, the pioneer of psychoanalysis. Sigmund Freud was born in 1856 in a little town called Freiburg, which was part of the Austrian Empire. He's often seen as the father of psychoanalysis. His innovative work in grasping how the human mind works really changed the game in psychology, psychiatry, and even influenced art, literature, and culture. Freud had some interesting ideas about the unconscious mind, how our personality is structured, and how we develop as humans. His theories really changed the way we think about behavior and mental processes. Freud's early life really influenced his fascination with how the human mind works. He went to the University of Vienna to study medicine and started off in neurology. However, his curiosity about mental disorders drew him into the psychological side of human behavior. As time went on, Freud came up with his theory about the unconscious mind. He suggested that a lot of our thoughts, feelings, and actions are shaped by drives and desires that we're not even aware of. Freud had this really interesting idea about the psyche being split into three parts: the ID, ego, and superego. The ID is all about our basic instincts and desires, while the ego acts as the rational part that balances those instincts with reality. Then there's the superego, which represents our moral and ethical standards. This idea about the human mind really became the foundation of Freud's psychoanalytic theory. Freud also made a big impact with his theory of psychosexual development. He suggested that our childhood experiences, especially those linked to sexuality, are really important in forming our personality and behavior as we grow up. Freud's ideas about the Oedipus complex really stirred things up. He suggested that young kids have these hidden feelings for their opposite-sex parent, which definitely raised eyebrows and got people talking a lot about how we grow and connect with each other. Freud really changed the game with his development of psychoanalysis. This therapeutic method digs into our unconscious thoughts using techniques like free association, dream analysis, and transference. It was truly revolutionary. He thought that if people could bring their unconscious thoughts out into the open, they could find relief and feel better about their psychological struggles. His work really set the stage for modern psychotherapy, shaping both how we practice in clinics and the theories behind psychology. Even though Freud made a lot of important contributions, his ideas stirred up quite a bit of controversy and have faced criticism over the years. A lot of his theories, particularly his ideas about sexuality and the Oedipus complex, have faced criticism and have been turned down by today's psychologists. But you can't deny the impact he's had on psychology and even further out. Freud's theories really influenced how therapy is practiced and how society thinks about the mind, mental illness, and human behavior. These days, Sigmund Freud is still seen as a major player in the story of psychology. People still find his ideas sparking discussions, research, and new discoveries, and his impact lives on in psychoanalysis, psychiatry, and cultural studies. Galileo Galilei, the dad of modern science. Galileo Galilei was born in 1564 in Pisa, Italy, and he's often referred to as the father of modern science. He made significant contributions to physics, astronomy, and helped shape the scientific method. Galileo's endless curiosity and amazing discoveries really changed how we see the universe and set the stage for the scientific revolution. Galileo started off studying medicine at the University of Pisa, but before long, he found himself more drawn to mathematics and natural philosophy. He found out some really important things, especially in mechanics, where he showed that objects fall at the same speed, no matter how heavy they are. This went against what Aristotle had always thought, which was that heavier objects fall faster than lighter ones. Galileo's studies on motion and mechanics really set the stage for Isaac Newton's laws of motion down the line. Galileo is best known for his contributions to astronomy. Back in 1609, he caught wind of the telescope's invention and, with a bit of creativity, made some enhancements to the design. Galileo, with his new telescope, made some really exciting discoveries. He spotted the 4 largest moons of Jupiter, noticed the phases of Venus, and took a good look at the surface of the moon. His observations gave solid proof for the heliocentric model of the solar system that Copernicus suggested, which claimed that the Earth and other planets orbit the Sun instead of the Earth being the center of everything. Galileo backed the heliocentric model, which really put him in a tough spot with the Catholic Church that believed in the geocentric view. Back in 1632, Galileo came out with his work, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, where he really supported Copernicus' theory. The church wasn't a fan of his work, and in 1633, Galileo found himself on trial with the Inquisition, where he had to take back what he believed. He spent the final years of his life stuck at home, under house arrest. Even with his personal struggles, Galileo's impact is really significant. He's seen as one of the early scientists who really tapped into experimentation and math to figure out how the natural world works. He really changed the game with his contributions to the scientific method, pushing for empirical evidence, and making some groundbreaking discoveries in astronomy and physics. Galileo's work really sparked inspiration for future scientists, like Newton, and his way of doing science is still a big part of modern research today. Galileo did some amazing things that really laid the groundwork for modern science. His bravery in sticking to his beliefs, even when others pushed back, is what keeps him celebrated as one of the great scientists in history. Mozart, the musical genius who changed music forever. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was born in 1756 in Salzburg, Austria, and he's widely seen as one of the greatest composers in the history of Western music. His compositions, think symphonies, concertos, operas, and chamber music, are known for their grace, beauty, and technical complexity. The impact he's had on music is truly immeasurable. Mozart showed off his amazing musical skills right from when he was just a kid. By the time he hit 5, he was already creating music, and as a teenager, he was performing for royalty all over Europe. Getting to experience various musical styles and cultures early on really shaped his one-of-a-kind compositional voice. He really got the hang of the classical styles of his time, but he also brought in his own fresh ideas, which made his pieces both easy to enjoy and layered with depth. Mozart's operas really stand out as some of his biggest contributions to music. Works like The Magic Flute, Don Giovanni, and The Marriage of Figaro are true masterpieces that blend complex musical structures with deep emotional resonance. People really love his operas because they mix drama, melody, and orchestration so well, and you can still catch them being performed all over the world. Mozart really stood out from other composers of his time because he could compose in so many different genres. He created some amazing symphonies that are now essential parts of the classical music scene, like the well-known Symphony No. 40 and the Symphony No. 41, which is often referred to as the Jupiter Symphony. His piano concertos really stand out for their amazing technical skill and deep emotions. Plus, his chamber music, like the string quartets and piano quartets, is seen as some of the most refined and lovely in the classical world. Mozart's music really connects with people, no matter when or where they are. It speaks to audiences of all ages. He has this amazing knack for expressing all sorts of emotions, whether it's joy and humor or sorrow and despair, which really makes his music feel so relatable and human. His works aren't just technically impressive, they're also emotionally stirring and continue to be a key part of the classical music canon today. Even though Mozart had his fair share of money troubles during his life, there's no denying how brilliant he was. He passed away at just 35, leaving behind an incredible and unmatched collection of work. Today, Mozart's music still inspires musicians, composers, and music lovers, and his legacy as one of the greatest composers in history lives on. Marco Polo, the Venetian explorer who connected the East and the West. Marco Polo was born in 1254 in Venice, Italy, and he's one of the most well-known explorers out there. He's famous for his journeys along the Silk Road and his experiences with the Mongol Empire. His stories about his travels, especially his experiences at Kublai Khan's court, have sparked the imagination of countless explorers and are considered some of the key historical records from the Middle Ages. Marco Polo grew up in Venice, enjoying a life of privilege. He grew up in a merchant family, and by the time he turned 17, he set off on a journey that would completely change his life. Back in 1271, Marco, his dad Niccolò, and his uncle Maffeo decided to embark on an adventure to the east. Their goal? To reach the court of Kublai Khan, who just so happened to be the grandson of Genghis Khan and the ruler of the Mongol Empire. They traveled through the Middle East, Central Asia, and China, and it ended up being a journey that lasted almost 25 years. Marco Polo's time in the Mongol Empire was a really important part of his life. He became a go-to advisor for Kublai Khan and explored a lot of the empire, visiting places that were pretty much a mystery to Europeans back then. Polo shares his adventures with vivid details about the places, people, and traditions of Asia, taking us from the bustling markets of China to the expansive steppes of Mongolia. His writings gave us a peek into a world that was really different from the Europe he knew. Polo really made a mark by documenting all the cultural and technological advancements happening in the East. He talked about the amazing cities in China, how they used paper money, and the really advanced infrastructure, like the canals and roads that linked up such huge areas. His accounts opened up a whole new world for Europeans, showcasing goods like silk, spices, and porcelain. These items would eventually spark the age of exploration and boost trade between Europe and Asia. Even though his journey had a big impact, people have been talking a lot about how accurate Marco Polo's stories really are. Some historians wonder if Polo really saw everything he said he did, since there aren't many records from his time to back up his travels. Still, his writings had a big impact, serving as one of the first and most detailed looks at Asia for Europeans. There's no doubt about it, Marco Polo's legacy is something we can't overlook. His travels really opened up some exciting new opportunities for trade and cultural exchange between the East and the West. When he made his way back to Venice in 1295 after being away for so long, he really became a well-known figure. Polo's story really grabs your attention, representing that adventurous spirit and the thirst for knowledge that defined the medieval era. These days, his name is still closely linked to exploration, and his legacy as a connector between two very different cultures lives on. Winston Churchill, who came into the world in 1874, really stands out as one of the most impactful people in British and global history. Churchill was a truly resilient figure, and his legacy really shines through his leadership during World War II, guiding the United Kingdom through some of its toughest times. Churchill came from an aristocratic family, but his early life wasn't all smooth sailing. He faced some academic challenges and had a few bumps in the road during his military career. But those challenges didn't stop him from going after a career in public service. He kicked off his political career as a member of Parliament in 1900 and took on several roles, including First Lord of the Admiralty, where he played a key part in modernizing the British Navy. Churchill really shone during World War II. So, when Britain was up against the threat of Nazi Germany led by Adolf Hitler, Churchill stepped in as Prime Minister in 1940. His strong leadership, highlighted by his memorable speeches like the famous "We shall fight on the beaches," really motivated the British people to keep going through the toughest times of the war. He just wouldn't accept defeat, and his strong belief that the Allies would come out on top really made a difference in how the war turned out. Churchill's time as a leader definitely had its ups and downs, filled with both successes and challenges. He got some backlash for how he managed a few military campaigns and for the severity of his policies. Still, his vision and determination during tough times really solidified his status as one of the most important figures of the 20th century. Aside from his wartime legacy, Churchill was quite the writer too, even snagging the Nobel Prize in Literature for his historical works. Churchill had a big impact that went beyond just the battlefield. He really shaped British politics and international relations for many years. After the war, he really pushed for the strength of the British Empire. But he also did a lot to build the relationship between Britain and the United States, making sure they were united during the Cold War. Winston Churchill passed away in 1965, and he left us with a legacy filled with courage, conviction, and leadership. His name really stands for determination and the relentless struggle for freedom. His life, filled with challenges and victories, still inspires leaders all over the world today. Nelson Mandela, the man who led South Africa to freedom. Nelson Mandela was born in 1918 in the village of Mbizo, South Africa, and he's known all over the world as a key figure in the fight against apartheid and for racial equality. His journey from a rural village to becoming the first Black president of South Africa really shows his resilience, sacrifice, and strong commitment to justice. Mandela grew up influenced by his background as part of the Thembu royal family. He went to school in the nearby towns and later decided to study law at the University of Witwatersrand. When he was a young man, Mandela got into politics by joining the African National Congress, ANC, in 1944. He was all about fighting against apartheid, which was a harsh system of racial segregation that really oppressed the black population in South Africa. So, Mandela got involved in activism and ended up getting arrested in 1962. Then, in 1964, he was sentenced to life in prison because of his involvement in anti-apartheid efforts. His 27 years in prison on Robben Island really stood out as a symbol of the global fight against apartheid. While he was in prison, Mandela turned into a global symbol, and his message for freedom and equality really struck a chord with people everywhere. So, back in 1990, Mandela got released, and he started having these peaceful talks with the South African government, which eventually helped bring down apartheid. Back in 1994, South Africa had its very first multiracial elections. And guess what? Mandela became president. He brought a divided nation together, worked on reconciliation, and pushed for human rights, which is why he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993. During Mandela's presidency, he really aimed to heal the wounds left by apartheid and work towards creating a democratic South Africa. He really focused on forgiveness instead of revenge, which helped shape the country's move from racial hatred to unity. Even after his presidency, Mandela kept pushing for peace, education, and human rights right up until he passed away in 2013. Nelson Mandela's legacy is truly remarkable. He stands as a beacon of hope, showing resilience and the strength of the human spirit when facing tough times. His life and work still inspire movements for freedom and equality all around the world. Steve Jobs, the game changer who transformed our lives, Steve Jobs, who came into the world in 1955, was a remarkable entrepreneur and one of the minds behind Apple Incorporated. His constant drive for innovation and perfection changed not only the tech industry, but also how people connect with the world around them. Jobs was really ahead of his time, and his ideas and products still influence our lives today. Growing up in California, Jobs had a knack for electronics and design from a young age. So, after he dropped out of college, he teamed up with Steve Wozniak and Ronald Wayne to co-found Apple back in 1976. Apple really hit it big with the Apple II, which was one of the first personal computers available for sale to the public. But it was really the launch of the Macintosh back in 1984 that solidified Jobs as a groundbreaking figure in the tech scene. So, after leaving Apple in 1985, Jobs started Next and picked up Pixar, which ended up changing the animation game completely. So, back in 1996, Apple picked up Next, which meant Jobs was back in the mix at the company. With him at the helm, Apple rolled out some game-changing products like the iPod, iPhone, and iPad. Each of these really shook up the tech world and raised the bar for design and functionality. Jobs was all about perfection, keeping things simple, and thinking outside the usual tech boundaries. He really had a knack for figuring out what consumers wanted and designing products that were both practical and visually stunning. His way of doing business, marketing, and design has really made a lasting impact on the tech industry and more. Even with all his achievements, Jobs had his fair share of controversies. People often said his management style was pretty demanding and a bit abrasive, and there were times when his vision didn't quite align with others in the industry. Still, you can't deny his legacy. Apple turned into one of the most valuable companies globally, and Jobs became a true icon of entrepreneurship and innovation. Steve Jobs passed away in 2011, but his impact is still felt today. His products and ideas have totally changed the way we communicate, enjoy entertainment, and do business. He'll always be remembered as someone who didn't just think outside the box, he completely transformed it. Pablo Picasso, the genius of modern art. Pablo Picasso was born in 1881 in Malaga, Spain, and he's often seen as one of the most influential artists of the 20th century. Picasso was famous for his groundbreaking approach to art. His work really pushed past the usual limits, which made him a major player in the rise of modern art. His innovative approach to abstraction and his ongoing changes in style really made a lasting impact on the art scene. From a young age, it was clear that Picasso had a real knack for art. When he hit his teenage years, he was already creating pieces that showed off his amazing skills. In the beginning, his works were shaped by the classical style he learned during his studies. However, as he grew as an artist, Picasso started to dive into new forms and ideas that really marked his career. Back in the early 20th century, Picasso really took the lead in shaping Cubism, a groundbreaking movement where he transformed objects into these cool abstract shapes and forms. His work, together with Georges Braque's, really shook up the basics of perspective and representation in art. One of his most famous paintings, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, 1907, is often viewed as a key moment in the evolution of modern art, since it turned away from the conventional rules of representation. Picasso's work changed and grew in so many ways over his lifetime. He tried out different styles, ranging from surrealism to neoclassicism, always on the lookout for fresh ways to express himself. He was incredibly versatile, dabbling in painting, sculpture, ceramics, printmaking, and even poetry. Picasso's art really showed the chaos of his era, like the Spanish Civil War and World War II. His pieces often revealed his strong personal feelings and political views. Picasso wasn't just an artist. He really was a cultural icon. He really knows how to push the limits of art and reinvent himself, which is what keeps him leading the pack in the art scene. His impact on modern art is huge, and people are still celebrating his works in museums all over the globe. Pablo Picasso may have passed away in 1973, but his legacy is still very much alive. His work is just as important today as it was back then, and people still think of him as one of the greatest innovators in art history. Archimedes, the ancient genius who changed the game in science. Archimedes of Syracuse, who was born in 287 BCE, is considered one of the brightest thinkers from ancient Greece. Archimedes was a mathematician, physicist, engineer, and inventor who really made a mark in various areas of science, including geometry and fluid mechanics. His work really set the stage for a lot of what we see in modern science and engineering today. We don't know a ton about Archimedes' early life, but it seems like he spent a good chunk of it in Syracuse, which is a Greek colony on the island of Sicily. He went to Alexandria, Egypt, to dive into his studies and learn from some of the brightest thinkers around. During this time, Archimedes started to make some really amazing discoveries. One of the things he's really well known for is the principle of buoyancy, which we also call Archimedes' principle. So, the story goes that he figured out this principle while he was in the bath, seeing how the water level went up when he got in. He famously exclaimed, "Eureka," which means "I have found it" in Greek. So, the principle is pretty straightforward. When something is submerged in a fluid, it feels an upward force that matches the weight of the fluid it pushes aside. This idea is key to figuring out how ships and other objects manage to float. Archimedes really contributed a lot to mathematics, especially in the field of geometry. He came up with ways to figure out the area of different shapes and the volume of solid objects. He was way ahead of his time with his work on measuring pi, and his inventions, like the Archimedean screw, really changed the game for engineering and irrigation. Besides his scientific accomplishments, Archimedes is well known for defending Syracuse during the Roman siege back in 212 BCE. He used clever machines like catapults and cranes to help protect the city, showing off his amazing ingenuity. Archimedes' legacy is still shaping science and math even now. He has really made a mark in physics, engineering, and mathematics, setting the stage for so many discoveries and innovations. Archimedes passed away in 212 BCE, but his brilliance still shines through, securing his spot as one of history's greatest thinkers. Thomas Jefferson, the founding father with a vision for the United States. Thomas Jefferson, who came into the world in 1743, is definitely one of the key players in American history. Thomas Jefferson, who served as the third president of the United States and wrote the Declaration of Independence, really shaped our ideas about liberty, government, and human rights. His thoughts helped lay the groundwork for what the United States is all about. His legacy goes way beyond just his political achievements. He was also an intellectual, an inventor, and a big supporter of scientific progress. Jefferson grew up in Virginia, where he went to the College of William and Mary and developed a strong interest in philosophy, law, and science. He jumped right into politics, starting out as a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses and then moving on to be a delegate at the Continental Congress. Back in 1776, he put together the Declaration of Independence, laying out the main ideas of American freedom and self-governance. His words, "All men are created equal," still hit home as a key point for equality and justice. Jefferson was president from 1801 to 1809. People often think back on his presidency and remember some pretty big achievements, like the Louisiana Purchase that basically doubled the size of the United States. Then there was the Lewis and Clark expedition, which went out to explore those new Western territories. Jefferson really championed the idea of keeping church and state separate, and he was all about having a government that was limited in power to safeguard individual freedoms. Jefferson had some pretty groundbreaking ideas about liberty and democracy, but his personal contradictions definitely complicate how we view his legacy. Even though he was very vocal against slavery, he still owned slaves during his lifetime, and this contradiction is still a hot topic of discussion. Still, Jefferson's idea of America as a place for free citizens and his impact on American political thought keep influencing the country's identity. Jefferson died in 1826, and interestingly, it was on the same day as his political rival and friend John Adams. He's still one of the most respected figures in American history, recognized for his smarts, vision, and dedication to the principles of freedom and democracy. He really made a huge difference in shaping the United States and spreading democratic values globally, and that influence is still felt today. Martin Luther, the monk who ignited the Protestant Reformation. So, Martin Luther was born in Germany back in 1483, and he really played a huge role in the Protestant Reformation. This movement totally transformed Christianity and had a big impact on European history. Luther really took a stand against the Roman Catholic Church, especially when it came to selling indulgences. His bold move sparked a religious revolution that ended up dividing Christianity into Protestant and Catholic branches. Luther started his journey as a monk in the Augustinian order, grappling with big questions about salvation and the Church's authority. After spending years studying and thinking things over, Luther started to feel more and more let down by what the Church was doing, particularly the selling of indulgences that claimed to offer forgiveness for sins if you paid up. Back in 1517, he made quite a splash by nailing his 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Castle Church. He was really pushing back against certain practices and urging everyone to get back to the core teachings of the Bible. Luther's daring move sparked a huge wave of religious change all over Europe. He believed that you could achieve salvation just by having faith, instead of relying on church rituals or indulgences. And this idea became a key part of Protestantism. Luther's translation of the Bible into German really opened up the scriptures for everyday folks, letting them read and interpret the Bible on their own, without needing to rely on church authority. The Catholic Church first attempted to shut down Luther's ideas, but they caught on fast thanks to the printing press, which made it easy for his writings to reach a lot of people. Luther's bold stand eventually got him excommunicated, but his impact just kept on growing. His ideas laid the groundwork for Lutheranism and kicked off the wider Protestant Reformation, which resulted in the emergence of different Protestant denominations and a significant change in the religious and political landscape of Europe. Luther didn't just shake things up in religion. He really got people thinking about freedom of thought, spreading power around, and boosting literacy too. He passed away in 1546, but his influence continues through the millions of Protestants around the globe who embrace his teachings. Martin Luther really showed a lot of guts by questioning authority and sticking to his beliefs, which is why he's considered one of the most transformative figures in history. Socrates, the dad of Western philosophy. Socrates was born in Athens around 470 BCE and is often seen as the father of Western philosophy. He really helped shape critical thinking, ethics, and logic, which set the stage for a lot of the philosophical schools that came after. So, Socrates didn't actually write anything down himself. Most of what we know about him comes from his students, especially Plato. Socrates had this really cool way of asking questions, which we call the Socratic method. It totally changed how people thought about teaching and learning. Socrates didn't just hand out answers. He really pushed his students to dig deep with their questions, helping them uncover the truth on their own. He really emphasized having conversations and seeking knowledge by thinking things through and looking at ourselves, instead of just sticking to old beliefs or traditions. Socrates thought that knowing things was crucial for being virtuous, and that really getting to know yourself was important for living a good and meaningful life. He famously said, "Know thyself," highlighting how crucial it is to be aware of ourselves and to reflect on our thoughts and feelings. Socrates believed that living without reflection wasn't really worth it, pushing people to think about what they do and what they believe. Socrates had a huge impact on philosophy, but he definitely ran into some opposition in Athens. His ideas really shook up the traditional views of the time. And a lot of people saw him as someone who was leading the youth astray because he was so critical of the established norms and values. Back in 399 BCE, Socrates found himself on trial for not respecting the gods and for leading the young people of Athens astray. He got a death sentence and decided to drink hemlock instead of giving up his beliefs. Socrates may have passed away, but his influence definitely carried on through the writings of Plato and others. His thoughts on ethics, knowledge, and what truth really is still shape the way philosophers and thinkers approach these topics today. Socrates' life and death really highlight how crucial it is to stay curious, uphold moral values, and chase after the truth. Henry Ford, the trailblazer of today's industry, Henry Ford, who came into the world in 1863 in Michigan, really changed how people made and bought things. Henry Ford, the guy behind the Ford Motor Company, really changed the game with his manufacturing innovations and the assembly line. It didn't just shake up the car industry. It had a huge impact on the whole global economy. His idea of making cars in large quantities and at a price everyone could afford changed not just American society, but the whole world. Ford grew up on a farm, which didn't really suggest he'd end up in the industrial world. From a young age, he really showed a strong interest in machinery and engineering. So, after trying out different mechanical jobs, Ford started playing around with engines and cars. And that's how he ended up founding the Ford Motor Company in 1903. Back in 1908, he rolled out the Model T, a car made to be budget-friendly for everyday Americans. The Model T really took off, transforming how folks got around and making cars a part of everyday life for millions. What really made Ford stand out was how he developed the assembly line. Back in 1913, Ford rolled out the moving assembly line, which really boosted how efficiently things were produced. This innovation helped Ford cut down on manufacturing costs, which made cars more affordable and accessible for the everyday worker. Ford really made a mark by paying his workers well, like when he introduced the $5 workday. This not only set a new standard in labor relations, but also helped his employees afford the cars they were actually building. Ford had an impact that went well beyond just cars. He was a key figure in shaping modern industry by showing how effective mass production can be and highlighting the value of standardized manufacturing processes. His way of doing business and emphasis on efficiency really influenced other industries, like consumer goods and electronics. Ford has quite an interesting legacy. He's known for his sharp business sense and innovative ideas in industry. But he also dealt with some backlash due to his controversial opinions on labor, his anti-Semitic writings, and his pushback against certain progressive movements. Still, you can't deny how much he's influenced the modern world. Henry Ford really changed the game with his vision and innovations, making cars a key part of our daily lives and kicking off a whole new era of mass production and consumer culture. James Watt, the innovator who fueled the Industrial Revolution. James Watt was born in 1736 in Greenock, Scotland, and he was quite the inventor. His contributions to steam power were super important during the Industrial Revolution. Even though he didn't come up with the steam engine, Watt made some key improvements to the designs that turned it into a dependable power source, kickstarting a wave of industrialization that changed the world. Watt got interested in machinery when he was pretty young, and people recognized him for his knack for mechanics. So, after he trained as an instrument maker, Watt got really curious about steam engines and how they could be used in industry. Back then, steam engines weren't the most efficient or reliable machines. They mainly served the purpose of pumping water out of mines. Watt really made waves in 1765 when he came up with a separate condenser for the steam engine. And it made a huge difference in how efficiently it worked. Watt kept the innovations coming. He kept working on the steam engine, tweaking it to make it stronger and more adaptable. His improvements made it possible for steam engines to be used in all sorts of industries, like textiles and transportation. Watt's steam engine really kicked things into gear for the industrial machinery that ran factories, mills, and trains. Besides his work on steam engines, Watt also played a key role in developing scientific instruments. He was an important player in setting up the British Association for the Advancement of Science and really helped push forward our understanding of steam power. Watt's work really played a big role in kicking off the Industrial Revolution, which totally transformed the global economy and society. Steam power really took off and changed everything. It helped factories grow, railways expand, and made it possible to produce goods on a massive scale. Watt's name lives on in the unit of power called the watt, showing just how much he influenced science and industry. James Watt's legacy lives on through the ongoing use of steam power and the technological advancements that came after it. His innovations really played a key role in shaping the modern world. The contributions he made during the Industrial Revolution helped push humanity into the era of mass production and modern industry. Ferdinand Magellan, the trailblazer who sailed around the world. Ferdinand Magellan was born in 1480 in Portugal and is known as one of the greatest navigators and explorers in history. He's always going to be remembered for being part of the first successful trip around the Earth, even though he didn't make it back home. Magellan's expedition really shook things up in world history. It showed that the Earth was round and that oceans connected everything. His bold journey changed how people thought about the world and exploration on a global scale. When he was younger, Magellan was part of the Portuguese fleet, where he picked up a lot of useful skills in naval warfare and exploration. So, in 1517, he decided to head to Spain after things didn't go so well with the Portuguese court. He went to King Charles I of Spain to get support for finding a new route to the Spice Islands, which are now in Indonesia. He suggested we sail west instead of taking the long and dangerous route around Africa, which was under Portuguese control back then. At first, people were pretty doubtful about Magellan's daring plan, but King Charles came through and gave him the ships and resources he needed to go for it. So, back in 1519, Magellan set off on his well-known journey with a fleet of 5 ships. The journey had its fair share of challenges right from the beginning. Magellan dealt with rough seas, mutinies, and clashes with indigenous groups along the way. Even with all these challenges, he never lost his determination. The expedition was the first to make its way across the huge stretch of the Pacific Ocean, a tricky and unknown sea that Europeans had never sailed before. One of Magellan's big achievements was finding the Strait of Magellan, a narrow passage at the southern tip of South America that connects the Atlantic to the Pacific. His crew was the first group of Europeans to navigate this tricky passage. But, Magellan wasn't the one to finish his journey. So, back in 1521, Magellan met his end during a clash with local warriors in the Philippines. Even though he passed away, the expedition didn't stop there. The rest of the crew carried on under Juan Sebastián Elcano's leadership and made it back to Spain in 1522, finishing the first trip around the world. Magellan's journey really changed a lot of things. It created new trade routes to the east and gave Spain the chance to claim territories that were previously unknown to Europeans. It really nailed down the idea that the Earth is round, something philosophers had suggested but hadn't actually proven yet. Even though Magellan didn't get to see the end of his journey, his expedition really changed the world. It shifted the course of exploration and pushed scientific understanding forward. Magellan's name is still around today thanks to the Strait of Magellan, the passage he discovered, which is still an important route for ships. His legacy as a trailblazer in global exploration still sparks inspiration in adventurers and historians. It's a great reminder of the courage, determination, and perseverance needed to venture into the unknown. Otto von Bismarck, the guy who shaped modern Germany. Otto von Bismarck was born in 1815 in Prussia and played a key role in bringing Germany together in the 19th century. He's often regarded as one of Europe's most clever statesmen. Bismarck was really good at using diplomacy, realpolitik, and military strength. His work in bringing together the different German states under Prussian leadership changed the political scene in Europe and had a big impact on history. Bismarck kicked off his political journey in the Prussian government, and he didn't take long to make a name for himself. Back in 1862, King Wilhelm I appointed him as the Prime Minister of Prussia. Back then, Germany wasn't a single country. It was made up of a bunch of independent states. Bismarck aimed to bring these states together under Prussia's leadership and create a strong, modern German empire. He aimed to reach his goal by mixing diplomacy, manipulation, and war, a strategy called realpolitik that focused on practical and pragmatic approaches instead of idealism or morals. Bismarck's first big win in diplomacy happened during the Danish War in 1864. Prussia teamed up with Austria, took on Denmark, and ended up gaining control of the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein. This one opened the door for more clashes ahead. Back in 1866, Bismarck really knew how to play his cards right with the Austro-Prussian War. He managed to lead Austria to defeat and effectively push them out of German matters. Winning this battle really established Prussia's power and set the stage for forming the North German Confederation, which brought together the northern German states under Prussia's guidance. But Bismarck's biggest win really happened in 1870 during the Franco-Prussian War. Bismarck skillfully played his cards to get France to declare war on Prussia, which brought the different German states together to defend their homeland. After winning against France, they went ahead and declared the German Empire back in 1871. It was a big deal, and King Wilhelm I of Prussia became the first emperor of Germany. Pretty interesting, right? Bismarck's leadership in unifying Germany was a real game changer in European history, turning the new empire into a significant power on the continent. Bismarck, as Chancellor of the German Empire, really put in a lot of effort to keep the peace in Europe while also boosting Germany's standing. He tried to steer clear of any conflict with the other European powers by forming a bunch of strategic alliances and treaties, especially the Triple Alliance with Austria-Hungary and Italy. Bismarck made some important changes at home, like introducing social welfare programs, which got him a mix of support and criticism. Bismarck really made his mark with his political smarts and leadership, shaping Germany and Europe in ways that are still felt today. He brought Germany together, turning it into a strong empire, and his diplomatic strategies influenced European relations for many years. When he resigned in 1890, it really marked the end of an era. Still, his legacy as the architect of modern Germany is a big part of European history that we can't overlook. Marie Curie, the trailblazer of radioactivity. Marie Curie was born in 1867 in Warsaw, Poland, and she really made a name for herself as one of the most famous scientists of the 20th century with her amazing work in radioactivity. She was the first woman to snag a Nobel Prize and is still one of the most iconic figures in science history. Her perseverance, dedication, and groundbreaking research really changed the game for both science and medicine. Marie Curie's adventure in science kicked off in Paris, where she attended the Sorbonne. That's where she met her future husband, Pierre Curie, who was also a scientist. Together, they started some groundbreaking research in physics. They were really into this new thing called radioactivity, a term that Marie actually came up with herself. Back in 1898, the Curies stumbled upon two new elements, polonium and radium, that gave off some serious radiation. This discovery really pushed our understanding of atomic structure forward and also created new possibilities for medical treatments, especially in cancer therapy. Marie Curie's work on radioactivity was truly groundbreaking. She came up with techniques to isolate radioactive elements and explore their properties. She found out that radium could help treat cancer by using its radiation on cancerous tissues. This discovery really changed the game for cancer treatment and paved the way for more research into radiation therapy. Curie received the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1903 for her scientific achievements, sharing it with her husband Pierre and Henri Becquerel for their work on radioactivity. In 1911, Curie snagged her second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry, for discovering radium and polonium. She made history as the first person to win 2 Nobel Prizes in different scientific fields. Even with her fame, Marie Curie encountered quite a few hurdles as a woman in a field largely dominated by men. She frequently found herself left out of scientific societies and dealt with doubt regarding her work. Still, her determination and smarts earned her the respect of the scientific community, making her one of the most influential scientists of her time. Unfortunately, the long-term exposure to radiation while she was conducting her research led to health issues, and she sadly passed away in 1934 due to aplastic anemia. Marie Curie's legacy is truly beyond measure. Her amazing research really set the stage for modern nuclear physics and medicine, and it still inspires scientists today, particularly women in STEM fields. Marie Curie's life really shows how curiosity, determination, and the quest for knowledge can lead to amazing things. Voltaire, the thinker who advocated for freedom and rationality, François-Marie Arouet, or as most people know him, Voltaire, was born in 1694 in Paris, France. He went on to become one of the leading and most influential philosophers during the Enlightenment period. Voltaire's writings and ideas were pretty groundbreaking for his time. He really pushed for reason, individual freedom, religious tolerance, and the separation of church and state. His sharp humor, smart insights, and challenges to authority really positioned him as a key player in the movement aimed at changing society with reason and enlightenment. Voltaire had quite a tumultuous early life, often clashing with the French establishment, especially the Catholic Church and the monarchy. He faced multiple imprisonments and exiles because of his pointed critiques of religious intolerance and political corruption. Candide is probably his best-known piece. It's a satirical novella that pokes fun at the optimistic philosophy of the era, all while shining a light on the hypocrisy and cruelty found in religious and political institutions. In this work, Voltaire cleverly used humor and irony to poke fun at deeply rooted societal norms while championing the values of reason and enlightenment. Voltaire believed that we could only make real progress as humans by using reason, without being held back by dogma and superstition. He really spoke out against religious traditions, especially the Catholic Church, which he thought held back free thinking and encouraged intolerance. Voltaire's push for religious tolerance and freedom of expression really struck a chord with the thinkers and leaders of the Enlightenment. People like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin were influenced by his ideas and ended up weaving many of them into the foundational principles of the United States. Even with censorship getting in the way, Voltaire kept on writing and pushing for change all his life. He spent quite a few years in exile in England, where he found inspiration in the relative religious tolerance and political freedoms that were present. Voltaire had some pretty interesting thoughts on governance. He really pushed for the separation of powers and emphasized how crucial civil liberties are. His ideas played a big role in shaping democratic thought and were a big influence during the French Revolution. Voltaire passed away in 1778 at the age of 83, leaving a huge collection of works that featured plays, essays, and philosophical writings. His ideas really influenced the thinking during the Enlightenment and played a part in the eventual fall of traditional monarchies in Europe. Voltaire's impact as a supporter of reason, freedom, and human rights still echoes in today's conversations about civil liberties and how government fits into our lives. Nicholas Copernicus, the pioneer of modern astronomy. Nicholas Copernicus was born in 1473 in Tarnia, Poland, and he's often seen as one of the key players in the history of science, especially for his groundbreaking idea of heliocentrism. Copernicus shook things up by challenging the idea that the Earth was the center of the universe, a notion that the Church and ancient scholars had backed for a long time. His work really set the stage for the scientific revolution, changing how we see the universe and our role in it. Copernicus grew up in a well-off family and studied law and medicine, but his heart was always in astronomy. He went to the University of Krakow and then spent some time in Italy, where he really got into the works of ancient Greek and Roman astronomers. During this time, Copernicus began to come up with his revolutionary thoughts on how the universe is structured. Before Copernicus came along, people generally believed that the Earth was the center of the universe, with everything else, like the sun, the moon, and the planets, spinning around it. So, this geocentric model, which comes from the ideas of the Greek astronomer Ptolemy, was actually accepted for more than 1,000 years. But Copernicus started to have some doubts about this model, especially when he realized that the way the planets seemed to move just didn't add up with a stationary Earth. So, back in 1543, Copernicus came out with his big hit, De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium, or On the Revolutions of the Celestial Spheres. In this work, he introduced the heliocentric theory, which basically says that the sun is the center of the universe, not the Earth, and that the Earth and other planets go around it. This theory was a game changer and totally unlike anything that had come up before. Even though Copernicus's ideas didn't catch on right away, some people thought they were pretty radical or even offensive. His work slowly made an impact on later astronomers like Johannes Kepler, Galileo Galilei, and Isaac Newton. They took his concepts and showed that the Earth and other planets actually orbit the sun in elliptical paths. Copernicus's heliocentric theory really kicked off modern astronomy and physics, setting the stage for the scientific revolution in the 16th and 17th centuries. Copernicus's ideas didn't just shake up astronomy. They also had a big impact on philosophy and religion. The notion that Earth wasn't the center of the universe really challenged the core beliefs of theology and philosophy regarding where humanity fits in the grand scheme of things. even though he faced some pushback from religious leaders. Copernicus's ideas gradually started to catch on, and his model ended up being a key part of modern science. Nicholas Copernicus passed away in 1543, which is also the year De Revolutionibus came out. Even though he didn't get to witness the complete effects of his work, his theory really transformed science and how we understand the universe. Today, we remember him as the father of modern astronomy. His bravery in challenging the status quo really changed how we see the heavens and our role in it all. Ernest Rutherford, the guy who pioneered nuclear physics, Ernest Rutherford, who came into the world in 1871 in New Zealand, is often seen as one of the key players in shaping modern physics. His amazing discoveries in nuclear science got him the title of Father of Nuclear Physics. Rutherford's work really shifted how we think about the atom and opened the door for nuclear energy development. Rutherford started his studies at the University of New Zealand and then made his way to England, where he had the chance to work with J.J. Thomson at the University of Cambridge. While he was at Cambridge, Rutherford stumbled upon a discovery that would change the scientific landscape forever: the idea of the atomic nucleus. Back in 1909, he teamed up with Hans Geiger and Ernest Marsden to carry out the well-known gold foil experiment. This experiment was a game-changer, revealing that atoms have a dense, positively charged nucleus at their center, with electrons whizzing around it. This changed the way we think about the atom and set the stage for the modern atomic model. Rutherford didn't just focus on atomic theory. He explored much more. Back in 1917, he was the first scientist to change one element into another artificially. He did this by hitting nitrogen with alpha particles, which led to the formation of oxygen. This process is key to nuclear reactions. Besides his work on atomic research, Rutherford made important contributions to the study of radioactivity, a field that Marie and Pierre Curie had discovered. He came up with the terms alpha and beta radiation and played a big role in helping us understand radioactive decay. Rutherford snagged the Nobel Prize in Chemistry back in 1908 for his research on radioactivity. During his career, he took on some really impressive roles, like being the director of the Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge. He also guided many future Nobel laureates, like Niels Bohr, who would expand on Rutherford's work in developing quantum theory. Ernest Rutherford passed away in 1937, but his discoveries really set the stage for what we see today in nuclear energy, medicine, and quantum mechanics. His contributions to science still have a big impact on physics and chemistry, which is why he's considered one of the greatest minds of the 20th century. Mao Zedong, the builder of modern China. Mao Zedong was born in 1893 in Shaoshan, China. He became the founding father of the People's Republic of China and is considered one of the most important political figures of the 20th century. Mao really changed the game for China, turning it from a mostly farming society into a significant player on the world stage. His groundbreaking ideas and policies are still influencing the country's growth today. Mao grew up in a really tumultuous time in China, with the country dealing with the fall of the Qing dynasty and the pressures of foreign imperialism. He was inspired by Marxist and Leninist ideas and joined the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, in the 1920s as one of its early members. Mao played a key role in the lengthy and violent fight for power that ultimately resulted in the rise of communist rule in China in 1949. Mao really made his mark by leading the Chinese Communist Party during the Chinese Civil War, where he faced off against Chiang Kai-shek and his nationalist forces. His approach of guerrilla warfare and focus on getting support from the peasants really played a big role in the communists coming out on top in the end. When Mao came into power, he aimed to completely change Chinese society with a bunch of different economic and social policies. One of the most well-known and definitely debated policies from Mao was the Great Leap Forward. It kicked off in 1958 and was all about trying to industrialize China quickly and bring agriculture together under collective farming. Unfortunately, the policy ended up causing a lot of famine, which led to millions of people losing their lives. Mao's later Cultural Revolution from 1966 to 1976 aimed to get rid of what he saw as capitalist and traditional influences in China, which resulted in a lot of chaos, violence, and social turmoil. Even though his policies stirred up a lot of debate, you can't overlook the impact Mao had on Chinese society and the world stage. With his leadership, China transformed into a communist superpower. And Mao's idea of a classless society really influenced China's identity for many years. He passed away in 1976, but people still talk a lot about his legacy, with opinions ranging from admiration to criticism regarding his rule. Benjamin Franklin, a founding father and inventor. Benjamin Franklin was born in 1706 in Boston, Massachusetts, and he's often seen as one of the most accomplished figures in American history. Franklin was quite the remarkable guy. Not only was he one of the founding fathers of the United States, but he also dabbled in inventing, science, writing, and diplomacy. He played a big role in creating the United States and made some amazing discoveries in electricity, which really makes him one of the most influential people of the 18th century. Franklin's early life was all about a strong desire to learn and a passion for bettering himself. He turned into a successful printer, launched his own newspaper, and penned a bunch of pamphlets, essays, and books, with Poor Richard's Almanac being one of the most famous. People really liked him for his cleverness and insight, and his thoughts on saving money, putting in effort, and being independent influenced American culture a lot. Besides being a writer and businessman, Franklin also made some important contributions to science. He's really famous for his experiments with electricity, especially that well-known kite experiment back in 1752, which showed that lightning is actually a type of electrical discharge. His findings in electricity really changed the way we understand it and how we can use it. Franklin was quite the inventor, too. He came up with a bunch of inventions, like the Franklin stove, bifocal glasses, and the lightning rod. His inventions were super practical, making everyday life better and helping push science and technology forward. Franklin, as a diplomat, really helped in getting France on board during the American Revolutionary War. And that support was key to the colonies winning against Britain. His diplomatic skills played a key role in shaping the Treaty of Paris, which officially brought the war to a close and acknowledged American independence. Benjamin Franklin died in 1790, but his legacy still lives on. His contributions to science, invention, and politics really shaped American society and had a ripple effect around the world. Today, people remember him not just as a founding father of the United States, but also as a key player in shaping modern science and democracy. Charles Dickens was an incredible storyteller and a sharp social critic. Charles Dickens was born in 1812 in Portsmouth, England, and he's often seen as one of the greatest novelists from the Victorian era. People still celebrate his works today for their vivid characters, intricate plots, and sharp social commentary. Dickens really had a knack for highlighting the intricacies of society and the challenges faced by the less fortunate, making him a true advocate for social change during his era. Charles Dickens had a tough start in life. His dad ended up in prison because of debt, and Dickens had to work in a factory as a kid to help out his family. His early experiences with poverty and injustice really shaped his writing. He often portrayed the lives of the poor and highlighted the social inequalities in Victorian England. He really hit his stride as a writer in the 1830s when the Pickwick Papers came out. In the years that followed, Dickens penned a bunch of cherished novels, like Oliver Twist, A Christmas Carol, David Copperfield, Great Expectations, and Bleak House. These works were not just fun to read. They also shed light on the tough truths of industrialization, how workers were exploited, and the challenges faced by the poor. Dickens really got into social reform, didn't he? He wrote about the importance of improving working conditions, education, and social services. His novels usually had characters dealing with the struggles that come from neglecting the poor, and he really pushed for changes in the justice system and better living conditions for the working class. Charles Dickens's works really made a mark on both literature and society. People keep turning his stories into films, plays, and TV shows, and you can't really measure how much he's shaped the modern novel. He passed away in 1870, but his legacy as a champion of social justice and a master storyteller lives on. John F. Kennedy was the 35th President of the United States. John F. Kennedy was born in 1917 in Brookline, Massachusetts. He went on to become the 35th President of the United States and is remembered as one of the most iconic political figures of the 20th century. His presidency was sadly ended by assassination, but it definitely made a lasting mark on American society and beyond. Kennedy's leadership during the Cold War, his vision for a better America, and his call for public service still inspire folks all over the world. Before he became president, Kennedy was in the U.S. Navy during World War II, and he earned the title of war hero. So, after the war, he jumped into politics and ended up getting elected to the U.S. Senate in 1952. He really stood out in his political career with his charm, smarts, and dedication to serving the public. Back in 1960, Kennedy snagged the presidency in what turned out to be one of the tightest and most intense elections in American history. During his presidency, Kennedy dealt with a lot of tough issues, like the looming threat of nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the fight for civil rights, and the growing conflict in Vietnam. Even with these challenges, Kennedy gained a reputation for his daring vision and his push for a fresh chapter of American progress. Kennedy's most famous speech, his inaugural address in 1961, featured the memorable line, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." This call to action really got a whole generation of Americans excited about getting involved in public service and doing good for everyone. While he was president, Kennedy focused on pushing forward civil rights, tackling poverty, and enhancing education. He kicked off the ambitious Apollo space program, which set out to land a man on the moon by the end of the 1960s, a goal that was reached after he passed away. Sadly, Kennedy's time as president came to an abrupt end when he was assassinated in 1963 during a visit to Dallas, Texas. His death really took everyone by surprise, and the impact he made lives on in the values of public service, hope, and the drive for progress that he stood for throughout his life. Sigmund Freud, the pioneer of psychoanalysis. Sigmund Freud was born in 1856 in what we now call the Czech Republic, and he's definitely one of the key players in the field of psychology. Freud is often called the father of psychoanalysis, and his ideas about the unconscious mind, human behavior, and the intricate structure of our psyche really changed the way we think about the mind. His influence goes beyond just psychology. It touches literature, art, and even the way we talk about culture today. So, Freud kicked off his medical studies at the University of Vienna and eventually found his niche in neurology. That's where he started diving into the psychological reasons behind mental disorders. At first, Freud used hypnosis to help patients dealing with hysteria. But he quickly came up with his own methods, which eventually led to the creation of psychoanalysis. One of his well-known ideas is the tripartite structure of the mind, which includes the ID, ego, and superego. Each of these parts plays an important role in influencing our behavior. The ID is all about those hidden desires we might not even be aware of. The ego is our way of handling what's real. And the superego is like that voice in our head reminding us of what's right and wrong. Freud's idea about the unconscious mind really changed the game. He thought that a lot of what people do comes from hidden desires, memories they've pushed aside, and conflicts from their childhood that haven't been resolved. Freud brought up the notion that our early experiences, especially those tied to family and sexuality, play a big role in how we behave as adults. He also came up with the idea of defense mechanisms, which people use to handle psychological stress. Freud's dive into sexuality and how it shapes human development stirred quite a bit of debate. He suggested that sexual desires played a key role in human development. But this idea faced a lot of skepticism and criticism. But his work really set the stage for later psychological theories and therapies. Even though Freud's ideas have been updated and challenged over the years, it's clear that he has had a huge impact on psychology. He really set the stage for what we know as modern psychotherapy and clinical psychology. Freud's thoughts on the human mind, dreams, and how early experiences matter still influence how we see human behavior today, which is why he's considered such an important thinker of the 20th century. Homer, the famous poet from ancient Greece. Homer is this amazing poet from way back in the 8th century BCE, and he's often called the father of Western literature. His epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, are the oldest surviving pieces of Greek literature and really set the stage for a lot of Western storytelling. Even with all the mystery around his life, Homer's impact on literature, philosophy, and culture is still really strong and lasting. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey have been fascinating people for thousands of years. The Iliad is all about the Trojan War, centering on Achilles and his experiences with pride, anger, and the tragic events that unfold. The Odyssey is all about Odysseus and his journey to get back home after the war. He runs into all sorts of mythical creatures and divine beings during his travels. These epic tales were shared through storytelling, reflecting the values of ancient Greek society, like bravery, honor, loyalty, and the twists of fate. We don't know much about Homer's personal life, but his works have really inspired countless writers, philosophers, and artists over the years. His themes of heroism and the human experience really connect with readers from different cultures and times. Arete, or excellence in everything, plays a key role in both the Iliad and the Odyssey. Characters are really focused on achieving glory and immortality by showing courage and strength in their actions. Homer's impact goes way beyond just literature. His epic tales have really influenced how we think about justice, honor, and the way gods interact with us humans. His take on human emotions, like love, revenge, loyalty, and sorrow, still resonates today, making his work something everyone can connect with. These stories give us a peek into ancient Greek society, showing us their warfare, politics, and relationships that really highlight the values and challenges they faced back then. Even though we might not know exactly who Homer was, his impact as the father of epic poetry definitely lives on. His works really set the stage for Western literary tradition, shaping the way poets, playwrights, and novelists approached their craft for centuries. Homer's epics still resonate today, just like they did thousands of years ago. They really capture that timeless essence of human nature and our quest for honor. Immanuel Kant, the philosopher who changed the game in ethics. Immanuel Kant was born in 1724 in Königsberg, Prussia, which is now Kaliningrad, Russia. He's known as one of the most influential philosophers in Western thought. His significant contributions to ethics, metaphysics, and epistemology changed the philosophical scene, offering a framework that still influences today's discussions. Kant really shook things up for earlier thinkers and kicked off a whole new chapter in philosophy, one that zoomed in on reason, morality, and what knowledge actually is. Kant's big work, Critique of Pure Reason, aimed to tackle some basic questions about how we know things as humans. He said that even though we can never fully grasp things as they really are, we can get a sense of the world through how we perceive it with our senses and our reasoning. Kant's idea of transcendental idealism suggests that our minds play a big role in how we experience reality, mixing what we observe with the built-in ways we think. This innovative theory really put Kant on the map as an important player in shaping modern philosophy. Kant is also really well known for his moral philosophy, especially his idea of the categorical imperative. Kant believed that when it comes to moral actions, we should follow principles that everyone can apply, no matter what our personal wants or the outcomes might be. This idea really changed the way we think about ethics by putting reason and duty right at the heart of what it means to act morally. Kant's philosophy highlighted the importance of treating others as ends in themselves, not just as tools to achieve our own goals, which really promotes human dignity and respect. Kant wrote a lot about political theory and the philosophy of history too. He was all about creating a world federation of republics, where countries could join forces to stop wars and encourage peace. His concept of lasting peace has sparked a lot of political movements and still strikes a chord in today's global politics. Kant faced a lot of criticism during his life, but his philosophy has really stuck around and influenced Western thought in a big way. His work really set the stage for later philosophical movements, like existentialism, pragmatism, and analytic philosophy. Kant passed away in 1804, but his ideas are still shaping ethics, law, and political theory even now. Florence Nightingale, the pioneer of modern nursing. Florence Nightingale was born in 1820 in Florence, Italy, and she's often recognized as the founder of modern nursing. Her groundbreaking efforts in healthcare reform in the 19th century changed how hospitals operated and helped to elevate nursing into a respected profession. Nightingale really changed the game in healthcare back in her day, and her impact is still felt in medical practices and nursing education all around the globe today. Nightingale was born into a wealthy English family, but she went against what society expected by choosing to become a nurse, a profession that at the time was viewed as unskilled and not suitable for women of her background. She got her training in Germany and France, and then in 1853, Nightingale took on the role of superintendent at a hospital in London. But it was her efforts during the Crimean War in the mid-1800s that really got her noticed by everyone. She was shocked by the dirty conditions in military hospitals. So she put in place strict hygiene practices and improved sanitation, which really helped to lower the mortality rate among soldiers. Nightingale did a lot more for healthcare than just making hygiene better. She pushed for better nutrition, good ventilation, and using stats to keep an eye on and enhance patient outcomes. She brought in some fresh ideas for nursing, highlighting how crucial education and training are for nurses. Back in 1860, Nightingale set up the Nightingale Training School for nurses in London, and it ended up being a blueprint for nursing schools all over the globe. Besides her nursing career, Nightingale was also quite the writer and statistician. She relied on data to back up her reforms, creating impactful reports that showed how sanitation affects health outcomes. Nightingale really changed the game with her statistical analysis of hospital conditions. It played a huge role in setting up evidence-based practices in healthcare. Florence Nightingale's legacy is still very much alive today. She's remembered not just as a trailblazer in nursing, but also as a pioneer in healthcare reform. She really set the stage for how nursing is done today, and her focus on education, hygiene, and caring for patients still shapes the medical field. Vladimir Lenin, the guy behind the Russian Revolution. Vladimir Lenin was born in 1870 in Simbirsk, Russia, and he's known as one of the key figures in world history. He played a major role in the Russian Revolution and helped set up the Soviet Union. Lenin, as the head of the Bolshevik Party, really changed the game in Russia with his revolutionary ideas and leadership. His vision not only reshaped the political and social scene there, but also sparked Marxist revolutions around the globe. Lenin had a tough start in life, especially since his older brother was executed for trying to kill the Tsar. This event really influenced Lenin, pushing him toward revolutionary ideas. He went to the University of Kazan to study law, but as he got more into Marxist politics, it eventually got him exiled to Siberia. During this time, Lenin really got into the ideas of Karl Marx. He was all about overthrowing capitalism and setting up a socialist state. So, back in 1917, with World War I creating all sorts of chaos and people really unhappy with the Russian monarchy, Lenin made his way back to Russia after being in exile. He took charge of the Bolshevik Party and pulled off a successful coup against the provisional government, which we call the October Revolution. So, the Bolsheviks took control, and Lenin ended up leading the new Soviet government. With him at the helm, Russia pulled out of World War I and started shifting towards a socialist state, taking control of industries and redistributing land. Lenin faced a lot of tough situations during his leadership, like civil war, foreign intervention, and economic troubles. Even with these challenges, Lenin really pushed for quick industrialization and collectivization, putting policies in place that would shape the future of the Soviet Union. But then his health started to go downhill because of a few strokes, and he passed away in 1924. When he died, it created a power vacuum that eventually allowed Joseph Stalin to rise to power. Lenin's legacy is still a topic of debate. He's often seen as a champion of the working class and a revolutionary leader. But it's important to note that his policies also set the stage for the authoritarian rule of the Soviet Union, resulting in political repression and the loss of millions of lives. Still, Lenin's thoughts and actions were super important in influencing the direction of the 20th century and how communism spread around the globe. Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor who transformed communication. Alexander Graham Bell was born in 1847 in Edinburgh, Scotland, and he really changed how we communicate with each other. Alexander Graham Bell is famous for inventing the telephone, and his amazing work in acoustics and communication really paved the way for the modern world we live in today. His inventions and discoveries in sound and speech have really made a lasting impact on human progress. Bell grew up surrounded by the study of sound, thanks to his parents who were both educators for the deaf. His mom, a gifted pianist who unfortunately lost her hearing, and his dad, a speech therapist, both had a big impact on his fascination with how we communicate. Bell was really into exploring how sound works and figuring out if it could be sent over long distances. Back in 1876, Bell made a huge leap forward with his most famous invention, the telephone. After a lot of trial and error, he finally managed to send the first clear speech sounds through a wire, famously calling out to his assistant, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." This moment kicked off a whole new chapter in how we communicate, changing the way people connect over long distances. Besides his work on the telephone, Bell also made important contributions to other areas like aviation, medicine, and hydrofoils. He tried out different methods to enhance hearing devices for the deaf and put in a lot of effort to create techniques for teaching speech to people with hearing impairments. Bell was really into scientific research and even helped start the National Geographic Society, showing just how diverse his interests were. Bell's work with the telephone brought him a lot of recognition and wealth, but his impact goes way beyond just that invention. His work really set the stage for the telecommunications industry, impacting everything from mobile phones to the internet. His contributions to science and technology still shape how we communicate today, making him one of the most significant inventors in history. Vasco da Gama, the explorer who found the sea route to India. Vasco da Gama was born in 1460 in Sines, Portugal, and he's known as one of the greatest navigators in history. His journeys really put Portugal on the map as a strong maritime nation and created a sea route to India, which totally transformed global trade and changed the course of history. Da Gama's journeys kicked off the Age of Exploration, a time when Europe expanded and changed the world in big ways. We don't have a ton of details about Da Gama's early life, but he did get some solid training in navigation and seamanship, skills that really came in handy for him later on. Back in 1497, King Manuel I of Portugal decided to put him in charge of an expedition aimed at discovering a sea route to India, something that European explorers had been trying to achieve for ages. So, Da Gama's trip around the southern tip of Africa and up the eastern coast was pretty risky, but in May 1498, he finally made it to India, landing in Calicut. This amazing journey created a direct sea trade link between Europe and Asia, skipping the overland paths that were managed by Arab traders. Da Gama really played a key role in putting Portugal on the map as a major colonial power. His achievements helped the country dominate the spice trade, which ended up bringing in a ton of wealth. Da Gama took a few more trips to India and became the Viceroy of India in 1524. His leadership really helped strengthen Portuguese influence in the Indian Ocean, but sadly, his time as Viceroy was cut short by his death later that year. His journeys changed the way global trade worked, and were also key in setting up European colonial empires. People still talk about Vasco da Gama and his incredible journey as an explorer. His sea route to India opened up new opportunities for exploration and trade, and his impact on the Age of Exploration played a big role in shaping the modern world. Da Gama really showed his bravery, leadership, and navigational talent, which helped him earn a spot in history as one of the standout explorers of the Renaissance. Abraham Maslow, the trailblazer of human motivation theory. Abraham Maslow was born in 1908 in Brooklyn, New York, and he's really well known for his innovative contributions to psychology, especially his creation of the hierarchy of needs. Maslow, being a psychologist, was really interested in figuring out what drives people and how they can grow and reach their full potential. His theories really changed the game in psychology, education, and management. Maslow started off looking at animal behavior, but before long, he found himself more drawn to what motivates humans. Back in 1943, he put out this really important paper called A Theory of Human Motivation, and that's where he first talked about the hierarchy of needs. Maslow suggested that people are driven by a range of needs, beginning with basic ones like food and shelter, and moving up to more complex needs like safety, love, esteem, and finally self-actualization, which is all about reaching your full potential. Maslow's hierarchy of needs really became a key part of humanistic psychology, which focused on individual growth, creativity, and the significance of personal experiences. He thought that reaching your full potential was the ultimate aim in life, and that people could get there by focusing on personal growth, being creative, and having meaningful experiences. Alongside his focus on motivation, Maslow looked into peak experiences, those incredible moments filled with joy, creativity, and a sense of something greater. He thought that these experiences were really important for people to thrive and could help them become more self-aware and fulfilled. Maslow's ideas have really made an impact across various areas like education, business, and therapy. He's really into self-actualization and personal growth, and you can see how that has influenced a lot of today's psychological methods. At first, people were a bit unsure about his work, but over time, it's become clear how important his contributions are to humanistic psychology. They still inspire new generations of psychologists, educators, and leaders today. Johann Sebastian Bach, the genius of Baroque music. Johann Sebastian Bach was born in 1685 in Leipzig, Germany, and he's often seen as one of the greatest composers in the history of Western music. His works are known for their complex counterpoint and deep emotional expression, leaving a lasting mark on classical music. Bach's music really goes beyond just the here and now, still inspiring both musicians and listeners today. Bach grew up surrounded by music, coming from a family full of musicians. He got training in both composition and performance, playing a bunch of instruments like the violin and keyboard. Bach had a diverse career, taking on roles like organist, violinist, and conductor. He took on different roles in churches and courts throughout Germany, where he created many of his well-known pieces. Bach's music really brings together skillful technique and deep emotion. His works, like the Brandenburg Concertos, the Well-Tempered Clavier, and Mass in B minor, really highlight his amazing talent in counterpoint, harmony, and developing themes. One of the things that really stands out about him is how he can take intricate musical lines and blend them into something that feels complete, even though he dealt with some tough times, like not getting the recognition he deserved and struggling financially. Bach's music made a comeback in the 19th century. Today, he's seen as one of the most important composers in classical music history. His music has had a huge impact on so many composers, like Mozart, Beethoven, and Brahms, and it's still being played and studied all over the world. Johann Sebastian Bach's influence as the master of Baroque music is still felt today. His compositions are a key part of classical music and really show the depth and complexity of human creativity. Bach's impact on music is still felt today, securing his spot among the great composers for many generations ahead. Che Guevara, the symbol of change. Ernesto Che Guevara was born on June 14, 1928, in Rosario, Argentina. He was a revolutionary, physician, and guerrilla leader, and his legacy still inspires activists and revolutionaries all over the world. Che was a man with strong beliefs, and his journey started in the chaotic political scene of 20th century Latin America. In his early years, he faced illness and traveled a lot. But it was really during his trip across South America when he saw the deep inequalities and poverty that left a lasting impression on him. This journey really influenced his strong beliefs and his passion for advocating social justice. Back in 1955, Che bumped into Fidel Castro in Mexico, and before long, he was all in for the Cuban Revolution. Guevara, being one of Castro's closest allies, was key in helping to successfully overthrow the Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista back in 1959. After taking charge, Che took on several important government positions, like Minister of Industry, where he tried to push through socialist reforms. Even though some of them stirred up quite a bit of debate, Che really stood out on the battlefield, showcasing his leadership, tactical smarts, and bravery. But Che's revolutionary spirit wasn't just limited to Cuba. He dedicated the following years of his life to spreading revolution all around the world. Back in 1965, he made the decision to leave Cuba to kickstart revolutionary movements in the Congo. Later on, he tried to stir things up in Bolivia. But unfortunately, his efforts to spark an uprising against the Bolivian government didn't quite pan out. Che was captured by Bolivian forces in October 1967 and executed when he was just 39 years old. Even after his passing, Che's image and ideas have turned into powerful symbols of defiance and resistance. His face on t-shirts, posters, and banners still symbolizes the fight against imperialism, capitalism, and oppression. Still, his legacy is a bit of a mixed bag. Some people see him as a hero for those who are oppressed, while others have their doubts about his methods and the violence that comes with his revolutionary approach. Che's passion for tackling inequality and his dedication to the pursuit of justice are still key aspects of the lasting influence he has on the world. St. Paul, the apostle who influenced Christianity, St. Paul, who was originally named Saul of Tarsus and came into the world around 5 AD, is seen as a key player in shaping Christianity. At first, Saul was really tough on Christians, thinking their beliefs posed a danger to the Jewish faith. But then, something incredible happened on the road to Damascus that changed his life for good. So, there was this moment when Saul had a vision of Jesus Christ, and that really changed everything for him. He ended up converting to Christianity and decided to go by the name Paul from then on. Paul, as an apostle, really committed himself to sharing the message of Christianity throughout the Roman Empire. He traveled on missionary journeys to a bunch of cities, like Ephesus, Philippi, and Corinth. Paul, unlike a lot of his peers, didn't just stick to preaching to Jews. He also made an effort to connect with Gentiles, or non-Jews. This really helped to broaden Christianity's influence beyond its Jewish origins. He focused on how important it is to find salvation through faith in Jesus Christ, to embrace grace, and to really value love and forgiveness. Paul is really famous for his letters, or epistles, that he wrote to the early Christian communities he helped set up. These letters make up a big part of the New Testament. They tackle important theological questions, offer advice on how to live a Christian life, and lay out how the Christian church is structured. His writings really set the stage for Christian doctrine, especially when it comes to things like justification by faith, the role of the Holy Spirit, and how the church is seen as the body of Christ. Even though he dealt with imprisonment, persecution, and tough times, Paul stayed committed to his mission. His martyrdom in Rome around 64 AD really helped to establish him as a key figure in Christian history. Today, Paul is seen as the most significant Christian missionary and theologian after Jesus, playing a key role in the growth and development of the faith. His influence reaches beyond just the Christian church. You can see it in Western thought and culture too. Paul's ideas about grace, salvation, and how all believers come together still spark conversations in religious and philosophical circles everywhere. Hernán Cortés, the guy who took down the Aztec Empire. Hernán Cortés was born in 1485 in Medellín, Spain. He was a Spanish conquistador, and his conquest of the Aztec Empire in 1519 really changed the course of world history. Cortés kicked off his adventure to the New World back in 1504 when he got involved with the Spanish colonization efforts in the Caribbean. He played a crucial role in Spain's quest to explore and conquer the Americas, eventually turning his attention to the wealthy and formidable Aztec Empire in what is now Mexico. So, back in 1519, Cortés showed up on the coast of Mexico with just a handful of soldiers. He quickly teamed up with some local indigenous groups that weren't too fond of the Aztecs. One of the key alliances was with the Tlaxcalans, who offered crucial military support. Cortés used a smart strategy by taking advantage of the internal divisions in the Aztec Empire. His clever tactics and psychological tricks helped him make his way to the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan. When Cortés met the Aztec Emperor Montezuma II, he really made the most of the emperor's warm welcome. Eventually, he ended up capturing him and using him like a puppet ruler. Even with all the battles and uprisings, Cortés and his troops managed to surround and conquer the Aztec capital in 1521. This was the point where the Aztec Empire came to an end, paving the way for Spanish dominance in Mexico and Central America. Cortés's victory definitely stirred up some controversy. His conquest was pretty harsh, filled with massacres, the downfall of the Aztec culture, and the spread of European diseases that really took a toll on the indigenous populations. People have really criticized what he's done, but you can't overlook his accomplishments as a military leader and someone who built an empire. Cortés's time in Mexico was definitely marked by political struggles and personal rivalries, but his conquest really changed the game, influencing the future of Latin America in big ways. People still talk about his conquest, with some seeing him as a harsh conqueror and others as a hero who ushered in a new chapter in history. Cyrus the Great, the guy who started the Persian Empire, Cyrus the Great, who was born around 600 BC in Anshan, Persia, is known as one of the most remarkable military leaders and visionaries in history. Cyrus, the founder of the Achaemenid Empire, really changed the game for Persia, turning it into the biggest empire the world had ever seen at that time, reaching all the way from the Mediterranean Sea to the Indian subcontinent. His legacy isn't just about the military victories. It's also about how he changed governance and showed respect for the cultures and traditions of the people he conquered. Cyrus kicked off his journey to power by taking down the Median Empire and bringing together the Persian and Median tribes. Back in 539 BC, he took over the city of Babylon, which was one of the toughest cities in the ancient world, and he did it with hardly any bloodshed. He's well known for his policies of tolerance, like granting religious freedom and letting the exiled Jews come back to their homeland. This choice really helped him gain a reputation as a fair and compassionate ruler. Cyrus really made the Persian Empire thrive by setting up a decentralized system of governance. This way, local rulers could keep their authority but still report to the Persian king. This method really helped keep things stable in such a large and culturally rich empire. The empire really worked on its infrastructure, like roads, postal systems, and cities, which made it easier for trade and communication to flow throughout the region. Cyrus's reign really laid the groundwork for the Achaemenid Empire to grow under his successors. His approach had a lasting impact on how future empires developed, shaping the governance structures of both Alexander the Great's empire and the Roman Empire. Cyrus's legacy lives on through the Cyrus Cylinder, which is often seen as the world's first declaration of human rights. His leadership, military brilliance, and dedication to justice and cultural respect really solidify his status as one of history's greatest rulers. John Locke, the pioneer of liberal thought. John Locke was born in 1632 in England and is often seen as one of the most influential philosophers in Western thought. Locke is often called the father of liberalism, and his thoughts on government, individual rights, and what it means to be human have really shaped political theory and helped modern democracies grow. Locke's philosophical work really focused on natural rights, the separation of powers, and the social contract. These ideas have played a big role in shaping the foundations of modern political institutions. Locke's well-known piece, Two Treatises of Government, 1689, made the case that everyone has natural rights to life, liberty, and property, and that the state shouldn't infringe on those rights. He thought that the main job of government was to safeguard these rights, and that its power should be restricted and rely on the agreement of the people it serves. This idea really set the stage for what we know as modern constitutional democracy and had a big impact on how the United States Constitution was written. Besides his political writings, Locke also had a big impact on philosophy, especially when it comes to epistemology and the philosophy of mind. He's most famous for his idea that the mind starts off as a blank slate, tabula rasa, meaning that we aren't born with knowledge. Rather, we gain it through our experiences. This idea really set the stage for empiricism and had a big impact on later philosophers like David Hume and George Berkeley. Locke's ideas also touched on education, where he pushed for a learning system rooted in experience and practical use, impacting educational reformers and institutions all over the globe. His thoughts on government, personal freedoms, and the value of rational thinking really help us grasp how modern liberal democracies have evolved. John Locke passed away in 1704, but his impact is still felt today, especially in political theory, where his thoughts on freedom, equality, and democratic governance keep influencing our ideals. His philosophy is a key part of modern political thought, influencing events like the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and more. Euclid, the dad of geometry. Euclid was a Greek mathematician who lived around 300 BCE, and he's often called the father of geometry because of his amazing contributions to the field. His work, especially the elements, laid the groundwork for mathematics for centuries, influencing how we think about geometry, number theory, and mathematical reasoning. Euclid had a really methodical way of looking at mathematics. He focused on logical deductions and theorems that could be proven based on some basic axioms. The Elements is made up of 13 books that dive into subjects like plane geometry, number theory, and solid geometry. Euclid's way of proving things by deduction, where he draws conclusions from already established axioms and theorems, was truly groundbreaking. This logical framework set the stage for mathematical proofs and has had a big impact on many generations of mathematicians and scientists. Euclid's work was super important, not just for geometry, but also for how we think about math as a whole. His methodical way of tackling proofs and solving problems really paved the way for future mathematicians like Archimedes and Isaac Newton. Euclid really made an impact that went beyond just math. His way of using logical reasoning turned into a great example for how we think about science and ideas in general. We don't know much about Euclid's life, but his contributions to mathematics have definitely made him a key figure in the history of science. His work was a go-to textbook for teaching mathematics all the way until the 19th century. And even now, students and mathematicians still dive into it. Even though he made huge contributions, Euclid's influence reaches far beyond just math. His way of using axiomatic systems and logical proofs really shaped the growth of areas like philosophy, logic, and even law. Euclid's work really laid down a solid framework for thinking things through systematically. It showed that you could take a handful of simple principles and use them to build up to more complex ideas. His impact on education, science, and mathematics still inspires and shapes our world today. Baruch Spinoza, the thinker of logic. Baruch Spinoza was born in Amsterdam in 1632. He was a Dutch philosopher with Portuguese Jewish roots and became one of the key figures of the Enlightenment. Spinoza was really influential in areas like ethics, metaphysics, and epistemology. He was a big supporter of rationalism, believing that reason should steer how we act and that the universe follows unchanging natural laws. His most well-known piece, Ethics, dives into the nature of reality, what it means to be human, and how God connects with the universe. Spinoza's philosophy was pretty groundbreaking back in the day. In Ethics, he suggested that God and nature are essentially the same, which is a concept referred to as pantheism. This marked a shift from the usual religious perspective of God being seen as a distinct, personal being. Spinoza believed that everything in the universe, including us humans, is part of the same divine substance, and that everything works according to the same natural laws. He turned away from the supernatural and focused on understanding the universe through reason, which ultimately got him kicked out of the Jewish community in Amsterdam. Besides his metaphysical ideas, Spinoza also contributed a lot to the philosophy of mind, ethics, and political theory. His idea of determinism suggests that everything in the universe is shaped by what came before, which really shakes up the usual thoughts about free will. Spinoza thought that if we get a grip on the natural laws of the universe, it could actually set us free. By aligning our desires with reason, we can live more virtuous lives. Spinoza had some pretty groundbreaking ideas that really didn't sit well with a lot of people, both in religious circles and among secular authorities. His work really shaped later thinkers like Leibniz, Hegel, and Nietzsche. You can see how his ideas have stuck around and influenced modern philosophy, especially in ethics, metaphysics, and political theory. These days, Spinoza is seen as one of the key rationalist philosophers and a really important figure in the history of philosophy. His focus on reason, ethics, and how everything is connected still strikes a chord in today's philosophical discussions. Harun al-Rashid, the Caliph of the Golden Age, Harun al-Rashid, who came into the world in 766 AD, was the fifth Abbasid Caliph and is known as one of the most notable rulers during the Islamic Golden Age. His reign, from 786 to 809, was a time of prosperity, cultural growth, and intellectual success in the Islamic world. During Harun al-Rashid's time, the Abbasid Caliphate really flourished, and Baghdad turned into the center for politics, culture, and intellect in the medieval world. Harun al-Rashid's time in power was marked by a stable political scene, military victories, and notable progress in science, literature, and the arts. The Caliph really backed scholars, poets, and scientists, which helped create a lively intellectual scene. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad turned into a hub for learning, where scholars from different backgrounds came together to translate Greek, Persian, and Indian texts into Arabic, keeping ancient knowledge alive and building on it. This movement really set the stage for a lot of the scientific breakthroughs that happened in the medieval Islamic world. Besides his cultural and intellectual contributions, people also remember Harun al-Rashid for his extravagant lifestyle and his generosity. In stories like those in 1001 Nights, he's often shown as a ruler who hangs out with regular folks and tries to get a feel for their lives. But, his time in power was filled with political drama, and he had to deal with a lot of challenges from rivals in the empire. Harun al-Rashid left behind a legacy filled with cultural and intellectual accomplishments, along with notable political power. With him at the helm, the Abbasid Caliphate really shone as a center of civilization, impacting Europe, Asia, and Africa in a big way. His time in power really showed what the Islamic Golden Age was all about. It was a time when science, math, medicine, and the arts thrived, setting the stage for many accomplishments in later civilizations. Francis Bacon, the pioneer of the scientific method. Francis Bacon was born in London in 1561. He was an English philosopher, statesman, and scientist, and his work really helped shape what we now know as the modern scientific method. Bacon was a major player in the scientific revolution, pushing for a fresh way to understand knowledge that relied on empirical evidence, observation, and experimentation. His thoughts on inductive reasoning and the significance of scientific inquiry really changed how we look at the natural world. Bacon's key work, Novum Organum, 1620, made a case for a more systematic way to gain knowledge by focusing on experimentation and observation instead of just depending on deductive reasoning or old authorities. He pointed out how important it is for scientists to collect data and test their ideas to uncover the truths about nature. His work really set the stage for the empirical approach that's now at the heart of modern science. Bacon wasn't just a scientist. He was also a well-known public figure. He was the Attorney General and Lord Chancellor of England, and his time in politics really helped him build influence in King James I's court. Bacon thought a lot about how science and government work together, and he really believed that scientific advancements should be used to help society as a whole. Bacon really shaped how modern science developed, particularly by pushing for the empirical method. His ideas really got the ball rolling for later thinkers like Isaac Newton and Robert Boyle. And the scientific method he pushed for ended up being the go-to approach for scientific research. These days, Francis Bacon is seen as a key player in the history of science and philosophy. His idea of a world led by knowledge, discovery, and reason still influences how we explore science and grasp the universe around us. Zoroaster, the prophet from ancient Persia, Zoroaster, or Zarathustra as some call him, was a prophet and a key figure who started Zoroastrianism, which is one of the oldest monotheistic religions out there. It's a bit fuzzy when exactly he was born, but most folks think he lived around 1000 BCE in ancient Persia, which is now known as Iran. Zoroaster taught about worshipping Ahura Mazda, the supreme god, and highlighted the ongoing struggle between good and evil that influences our world. Zoroastrianism, the religion he set up, was quite groundbreaking back then since it introduced the concept of one god at a time when many gods were the norm. Zoroaster's teachings really highlighted how important it is to make ethical choices and take personal responsibility. He believed that each person's actions play a part in the ongoing battle between good and evil in the universe. People who follow Zoroastrianism had some interesting beliefs about what happens after we die, like judgment, heaven, hell, and even the notion of a final savior. These ideas ended up having an impact on other big religions, such as Christianity and Islam. Zoroaster's teachings got put together in the Avesta, which is the sacred text for Zoroastrianism. His philosophy also included the concept of Asha, or divine truth, which helped people make morally right choices. The religion really shaped the cultures of ancient Persia and the surrounding areas, affecting everything from social structures to religious practices. Even after all those years, Zoroastrianism remained a major religion in Persia for more than 1,000 years. It served as the state religion of the powerful Achaemenid Empire and continued on through the Sassanid Empire, right up until the emergence of Islam in the 7th century. These days, Zoroastrianism is still around as a minority religion, mainly with its followers in Iran and India. Zoroaster's legacy continues through the ideas of ethical dualism, the importance of personal choice, and the belief in a supreme God. His ideas really laid the groundwork for a lot of the spiritual and moral principles that connect with different cultures and religious traditions. Mary Wollstonecraft, champion for women's rights. Mary Wollstonecraft was born in 1759 in London. She was an English writer, philosopher, and a strong advocate for women's rights. Mary Wollstonecraft is often seen as a key player in the early feminist movement, and she's really famous for her influential book, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, published in 1792. In this powerful piece, she made a strong case for the education and fair treatment of women, pushing back against the social norms that were common in her era. Wollstonecraft thought that women, just like men, were rational beings who deserved the same chances for education, jobs, and the ability to make their own choices. Back in the day, when women were usually seen as less than men and stuck in the home, her thoughts really shook things up and stirred up quite a bit of debate. She pointed out that the weaknesses people often see in women come from a lack of education, not from any natural limitations. She believes that by empowering women with education, they can really make a meaningful impact in society. Along with her strong support for women's rights, Wollstonecraft also wrote a lot about different subjects like politics, education, and morality. She really emphasized how crucial individual freedom, reason, and social justice are. She really had a knack for pointing out social inequality long before it became a hot topic. And she didn't just focus on women. She also highlighted the struggles of the lower classes. She imagined a society where reason and justice took the lead, instead of strict social structures and traditional gender roles. Wollstonecraft's life was full of challenges and some pretty heated debates. She had a pretty unique relationship with the philosopher William Godwin, and together they had a daughter, Mary, who would later become the well-known author of Frankenstein. Mary Wollstonecraft passed away too soon in 1797, just after welcoming her daughter into the world. Yet her writings have kept inspiring countless feminists and social reformers in the years that followed. These days, Mary Wollstonecraft is recognized as a trailblazer for feminism, and her thoughts have really shaped the way gender equality and women's rights movements have evolved around the globe. She really paved the way for women's education and empowerment, and her impact is still a key part of today's feminist ideas. Hatshepsut was the female pharaoh of ancient Egypt. Hatshepsut was one of Egypt's most successful pharaohs, and she ruled from 1479 to 1458 BCE during the 18th dynasty. She's seen as one of the rare women to take on the title of pharaoh, a position that's usually held by men. Hatshepsut's time as ruler was really impressive, with lots of achievements in architecture, trade, and diplomacy that helped make Egypt stronger. Hatshepsut started out as the regent for her young stepson, Thutmose III, but eventually took the bold step of declaring herself pharaoh and ruling on her own. To strengthen her standing, she presented herself as a male pharaoh in public, even donning male attire and a fake beard. This gesture really helped her assert her authority and gain acceptance in the male-dominated political and religious scene of ancient Egypt. One of her standout achievements was growing Egypt's trade networks. Hatshepsut's expedition to the land of Punt, which many think was in what we now call Somalia or Ethiopia, stands out as one of the most successful in Egyptian history. The journey brought back some amazing treasures and exotic goods like incense, gold, and even some unique animals, which really helped boost Egypt's economy and reputation. Besides her diplomatic and economic successes, Hatshepsut is well known for her impressive building projects. One of the most well-known sites is her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, which sits on the west bank of the Nile. This amazing piece of architecture really shows off her vision and grasp of Egyptian religious practices. And it's definitely one of Egypt's most iconic landmarks. Even though Hatshepsut made some really important contributions, her legacy kind of got pushed aside by her successor, Thutmose III, who tried to wipe her from the history books. Several of her monuments got vandalized, and they took her name off the official records. Modern archaeology has really helped bring Hatshepsut back into the spotlight as one of Egypt's most accomplished rulers. Richard the Lionheart, the English king and crusader, Richard I of England, often called Richard the Lionheart, was born in 1157 and is remembered as one of the most renowned kings of the medieval era. Richard was known for his bravery, leadership, and military skills, which is why he earned the nickname Lionheart for his courage in battle. His time in power from 1189 to 1199 is mostly known for his involvement in the Third Crusade, where he took charge of the Christian forces battling against the Muslim leader Saladin. Richard's adventures in the Holy Land made him quite famous, even though he didn't manage to take back Jerusalem. His efforts really helped boost the Christian presence in the area. Richard really made a name for himself during the Crusade, especially with his wins at the Battle of Arsuf and by taking important coastal cities. It definitely showed he was a talented and brave leader. Even though Richard had a legendary military career, his time as King of England was short and a bit rocky. He spent a lot of his time as king away from England, either leading the crusade or involved in military campaigns in France. This absence really put a strain on the English crown and left the kingdom in the hands of his officials and his brother, John. Still, people really looked up to Richard for his chivalrous traits and viewed him as a true symbol of knightly bravery. Richard the Lionheart's legacy goes beyond his military achievements. It also includes how he influenced the concept of kingship in the medieval era. His bravery, power, and dedication to the Crusades turned him into a legendary figure in English and European history. Even though Richard didn't spend much time in England, his legacy stuck around, and he's still seen as an important figure in history, representing the values of medieval chivalry and knighthood. Thomas More, the insightful thinker and politician. Thomas More was born in 1478 in London. He was an English lawyer, scholar, and statesman, and he became well known for his work as a humanist and his strong principles. More is probably most recognized for his book Utopia, which came out in 1516 and painted a picture of an ideal society grounded in reason, justice, and equality. He really dove into political and social issues, which made him a significant player in the humanism movement. More had quite the journey in public service, especially as he gained recognition during the reign of King Henry VIII. He was a member of Parliament, then became the Speaker of the House of Commons, and eventually took on the role of Lord Chancellor. Even though he was successful in politics, More's personal beliefs frequently clashed with the king, especially when Henry VIII wanted to divorce Catherine of Aragon and create the Church of England. More didn't back the king's decisions, and he wouldn't recognize Henry as the supreme head of the church, which ultimately brought about his downfall. More really stuck to his beliefs, and that's what ended up leading him to become a martyr. Back in 1535, he was put to death for treason because he wouldn't swear an oath of loyalty to the king's new religious policies. Thomas More's unwavering stance when confronted with death turned him into a symbol of integrity and conscience. These days, people remember Thomas More not just for his smart ideas, especially in political philosophy, but also for his bravery and dedication to his beliefs. His work still shapes the ideas of political thinkers and humanists everywhere, and his legacy as a martyr for religious freedom and individual conscience is a key part of Western thought. Cleopatra, the final pharaoh of Egypt, Cleopatra VII, the final queen of the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, is definitely one of history's most intriguing and well-known personalities. She was born in 69 BCE and took the throne when she was quite young, ruling until her death in 30 BCE. Cleopatra is known for her smarts, savvy political skills, and stunning looks, all of which she skillfully leveraged in her personal and political endeavors. Her connections with influential Roman figures like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were key in shaping the history of the Mediterranean region. Cleopatra really made her mark as a leader, working hard to bring Egypt back to its heyday. When her father, Ptolemy XII, passed away, she stepped into the role of co-regent alongside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. But then, things got a bit messy with power struggles, and she ended up being exiled. During this time, she built a relationship with Julius Caesar, who assisted her in reclaiming the throne in 47 BCE. Cleopatra and Caesar teamed up both politically and romantically, and from that union came their son, Caesarion, who was seen as Caesar's heir. So, after Caesar was assassinated back in 44 BCE, Cleopatra decided to team up with Mark Antony, who was a Roman general. They ended up forming a pretty powerful alliance. Their relationship, in both politics and love, turned into quite the legend. They had 3 kids together, and Cleopatra was really looking to create a new ruling dynasty in Egypt with Antony by her side. But then, Octavian, who later became Augustus, came onto the scene, and he saw Antony and Cleopatra as a real threat to his power, which put a stop to their ambitions. Back in 31 BCE, Antony and Cleopatra's forces faced a major defeat at the Battle of Actium, thanks to Octavian's navy. After their defeat, the two lovers made their way to Egypt, where they ultimately took their own lives in 30 BCE. When Cleopatra died, it signaled the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt and kicked off Egypt's integration into the Roman Empire. Cleopatra is still seen as a lasting symbol of power, smarts, and mystery. So many artists, writers, and filmmakers have explored her life and legacy in their work. Even though people often focus on her reputation as a seductress, Cleopatra was really a talented ruler. She managed the tricky political scene of her time with impressive skill and a smart approach. Nero, the notorious Roman emperor, Nero, who came into the world in 37 CE, was the 5th emperor of Rome and is definitely one of the most infamous characters in ancient history. He took the throne as emperor when he was just 16, following the death of his stepfather, Emperor Claudius, and he ruled from 54 CE until he passed away in 68 CE. Nero ruled for 14 years, and his time in power is often recalled for its cruelty, extravagance, and the eventual collapse of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. When Nero first took the throne, he was mostly influenced by his mother, Agrippina the Younger, and his teachers, like the philosopher Seneca. As he grew older, Nero started to really assert his independence, and his time as ruler was marked by a bunch of controversial and violent actions. Things really went downhill between him and his mom, and it all ended tragically with her murder in 59 CE. Nero was pretty brutal with his family. 2. He had his wife, Octavia, executed, and there are claims that he kicked his second wife, Poppaea Sabina, to death while she was pregnant. One of the most talked about moments during Nero's time was definitely the Great Fire of Rome back in 64 CE. It really wiped out a huge part of the city. So, there were some whispers going around that Nero might have actually set the fire himself to make room for his big building plans. But honestly, there's not much proof to back that up. Still, Nero's reaction to the disaster got him a lot of criticism. He pointed fingers at the Christians for the fire, which sparked a harsh wave of persecution against this minority group. Nero's over-the-top lifestyle and grand building projects, like his massive palace, the Domus Aurea, really pushed the Roman aristocracy away. During his time in power, there were quite a few military losses and increasing discontent throughout the empire. Back in 68 CE, things were getting pretty chaotic, with revolts and rebellions popping up everywhere. The Roman Senate decided to label Nero as a public enemy. After being left by his supporters, he took his own life at just 30 years old, which signaled the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Nero's time in power was marked by a lot of excess and cruelty, but it also brought a boom in the arts, especially in music and theater, where Nero even took the stage himself. Today, Nero is seen as a symbol of tyranny and decadence, known for his notorious actions and the turmoil that characterized the last years of the Roman Empire's first dynasty. Marie Antoinette, France's final queen. Marie Antoinette was born in 1755 in Vienna, Austria, and she became the Queen of France in 1774, holding that title until her execution in 1793. People often think of her as a representation of the lavishness of the French monarchy and the eventual collapse of the Bourbon dynasty. Even though she was really popular when she first married Louis XVI, her time as queen ended up being linked to all sorts of scandals, lavish spending, and, in the end, a tragic fate. Marie Antoinette was the daughter of Empress Maria Theresa of Austria, and she got married to Louis XVI when she was just 14. This marriage was arranged to strengthen the alliance between Austria and France. At first, everyone loved her for her beauty, elegance, and charm as queen. But soon enough, her lavish lifestyle started to raise eyebrows, especially among the French people. She really went all out on clothes, gambling, and fancy court events, which was a big difference from the struggles that a lot of her people were dealing with. What she did really added to the increasing frustration with the monarchy, especially considering the financial crisis in France. The French Revolution kicked off in 1789 and really turned Marie Antoinette's life upside down. As the revolution moved forward, the royal family found themselves in prison, and Marie Antoinette's reputation took a hit with accusations of being a foreign agent and plotting against the revolution. Her lavish spending, along with the tough situation in France's economy, made her a prime target for revolutionary propaganda. So, back in 1793, Marie Antoinette was put on trial for treason. And guess what? She was found guilty and sentenced to death. On October 16th, 1793, she faced execution by guillotine at the Place de la Révolution in Paris. Her passing signaled the close of the monarchy in France and kicked off the Reign of Terror. People have talked a lot about Marie Antoinette's legacy. People often think of her as a symbol of royal excess and arrogance, but some historians believe that her reputation has been unfairly tarnished. No matter how people see her, her life and death are still one of the most dramatic and touching parts of the French Revolution's history. Ludwig van Beethoven, the brilliant composer Beethoven, who came into the world in 1770 in Bonn, Germany, is often seen as one of the top composers in the history of Western music. His compositions, which bridged the classical and romantic eras, really changed the game in music and had a huge influence on how classical music developed. Beethoven's music really stands out for its emotional depth, creativity, and intricate details. He truly is a lasting icon of musical brilliance. Beethoven had a knack for music from a young age, and by the time he was a teenager, he was already busy composing and performing. In the beginning, his works were shaped by classical composers such as Mozart and Haydn. However, as he developed, Beethoven's compositions became bolder and more inventive. Beethoven's music really stands out because he can express so many different feelings, whether it's joy and triumph or sorrow and despair. When Beethoven was in his late 20s, he started experiencing hearing loss. And unfortunately, it only got worse as time went on. Even with that challenge, he kept on creating some of his most well-known pieces, like his Ninth Symphony and the later string quartets, all while dealing with almost total deafness. It's pretty amazing how he can create such complex and powerful music, even without being able to hear it. It really shows off his incredible talent and determination. Beethoven's music really shook things up by moving away from the usual structures of his time. He brought in fresh forms, harmonies, and orchestral techniques that were quite innovative. His symphonies, sonatas, and concertos really stretched the limits of classical music and paved the way for future composers. The Ode to Joy, which is the last movement of his Ninth Symphony, has turned into one of the most well-known and cherished pieces in classical music. Even with his personal struggles and the hurdles he dealt with because of his hearing loss, Beethoven's music still connects with audiences everywhere. People really admire his works for their depth, complexity, and emotional power. It's clear that his legacy as one of the greatest composers of all time is well established. John Calvin, the pioneer of Reformed theology. John Calvin was born in 1509 in Noyon, France. He was a theologian and pastor, and he really made a significant impact during the Protestant Reformation. His ideas and writings laid the groundwork for Calvinism, which is a significant branch of Protestantism. They really shaped Christian theology and had a big impact on modern Western thought. Calvin started off his career as a lawyer, but made a shift to theology in the early 1530s. He really felt the impact of Martin Luther's works and the rising discontent with the Roman Catholic Church. Back in 1536, Calvin put out his important book, Institutes of the Christian Religion, where he laid out his theological ideas in a clear and organized way. The book discussed his views on salvation, predestination, and God's sovereignty, and it ended up being a key part of Reformed theology. One of Calvin's most debated ideas was the doctrine of predestination. This concept suggested that God had already decided who would be saved and who would be damned, regardless of what individuals did or their merits. This idea really changed the game for personal faith and how churches are run, highlighting just how much authority God has in every part of our lives. Calvin's ideas really took off across Europe, especially in places like Switzerland, the Netherlands, and some areas of France and Scotland. In Geneva, where he lived for a good part of his life, Calvin set up a government that was rooted in his theological ideas. He introduced some changes that involved setting up a strict moral code, putting an emphasis on education, and encouraging church discipline. It's hard to overstate how much John Calvin has shaped Protestantism and Western Christianity. His theological ideas are still influencing Reformed churches globally, and his focus on God's sovereignty and the significance of Scripture is key for many Protestant denominations. Calvin's legacy definitely sparks some debate, especially when you think about how he treated dissenters and his involvement in the persecution of people like Michael Servetus. Still, you can't overlook the impact he had on theology and church governance. Akbar the Great, a Mughal emperor. Akbar the Great was born in 1542 and was the third ruler of the Mughal Empire in India. He reigned from 1556 until he passed away in 1605. People often say his reign stands out as one of the most successful in Indian history. It was all about military victories, smart administrative changes, and a welcoming approach to different religions, which really helped create a unified and thriving empire. Akbar was known for his innovative leadership and visionary policies, which earned him a place as one of the most respected rulers in Indian history. Akbar stepped into the role of emperor when he was just 13 years old, following the unexpected passing of his dad, Emperor Humayun. Even though he was young, Akbar showed great skill and determination as a leader, with the support of his regent, Bairam Khan, who played a key role in helping him strengthen his power. As he grew older, Akbar showed himself to be a clever military strategist and a savvy politician. He grew the Mughal Empire to cover a large part of the Indian subcontinent, reaching into the north, central India, and some areas of the Deccan Plateau. One of the standout things about Akbar was his approach to religious tolerance. He pushed for a policy that embraced inclusivity, giving his diverse subjects the freedom to worship as they pleased. Whether they were Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, or Christians, he got rid of the jizya tax for non-Muslims and really focused on interfaith conversations. He even came up with a new blended religion called Din-i-Ilahi, but it didn't attract a lot of followers. His approach to religion really played a key role in keeping the peace in such a diverse empire. Akbar really loved the arts and created a space where culture could thrive. During his time in charge, the Mughal Empire experienced a fantastic period for art, literature, and architecture, with notable advancements in painting, music, and poetry. Akbar's court had this amazing group of scholars, poets, and artists called the Navaratnas, or Nine Jewels. They really added to the cultural richness of the empire. Akbar the Great is remembered as a wise and tolerant ruler who brought stability to a large and diverse empire. His time in power really set the stage for the Mughal Empire's ongoing success in the years to come. People still talk about his efforts to promote religious harmony and support the arts as major highlights in world history. The Wright brothers, trailblazers of aviation. Orville and Wilbur Wright were two American brothers from the 19th century who are known for inventing and building the first successful powered airplane. It was on December 17th, 1903, that they really made history in aviation. Their aircraft, the Flyer, actually took its first controlled, sustained flight at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Pretty amazing, right? This big event really kicked off modern aviation and changed how we travel and see the world. The Wright brothers were raised in Dayton, Ohio, and that's where their fascination with mechanics and engineering really took off. They started out making bicycles, picking up hands-on experience in design and mechanics along the way. They got really interested in flight after reading about what other aviation pioneers were doing. This sparked them to dive into their own experiments with aerodynamics and aviation. They took a careful and systematic approach, really honing in on important aspects like control, lift, and propulsion, areas that earlier inventors didn't quite tackle properly. The Wright brothers did a lot of testing with gliders before they created their first powered plane. Back in the late 1890s and early 1900s, they were busy building and testing a bunch of glider models, really honing in on their grasp of aerodynamics. They set up a wind tunnel to test their designs, which provided them with useful data on wing shapes and aerodynamics. This experimental approach played a key role in their success, since they were the first to really grasp how important it is to control an aircraft while it's flying. So, back in 1903, after a bunch of hard work and some bumps along the way, the Wright brothers finally got their Flyer off the ground. It flew for 12 seconds and went about 120 feet. Pretty cool, right? After that achievement, there were a few more flights on the same day, one of which lasted 59 seconds and went 852 feet. The Wright brothers succeeded because they never gave up, came up with new ideas, and used a scientific method to tackle the problems of flying. The Wright brothers' achievement really opened the door for aviation technology, which then sparked a quick expansion of the aviation industry throughout the 20th century. Their legacy as the pioneers of powered flight really changed the game for science, technology, and how we connect with each other in the world today. Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Emperor, Charlemagne, or Charles the Great as he's sometimes called, was the king of the Franks starting in 768 and became the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire in 800, holding that title until he passed away in 814. People often call him the father of Europe since he played a big part in bringing together a lot of Western Europe in the early Middle Ages, setting the stage for what would become the modern European states. Charlemagne's time as ruler was all about stability, a cultural comeback, and bringing politics together, which really shaped the future of Europe. Charlemagne took over the Frankish kingdom from his dad, Pepin the Short, and grew the kingdom by leading a bunch of military campaigns. He took over a lot of land, like what we now call France, Germany, the Low Countries, and some areas in Italy. Charlemagne was really good at military strategy and bringing people together, which played a big role in his success in uniting the different parts of Europe under one ruler. One of Charlemagne's biggest accomplishments was his part in the Carolingian Renaissance, which was a cultural revival that sparked a fresh interest in learning, the arts, and religious scholarship. Charlemagne was all about promoting Latin studies, getting manuscripts made, and boosting religious education. He was all about setting up monasteries and schools across his empire, turning them into hubs for learning and intellectual buzz. Charlemagne's empire was a big deal, not just in politics and military might, but also when it came to religion. Back in 800, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne as the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. This really solidified his role as the protector of Christianity in Western Europe. Charlemagne teamed up with the Catholic Church, really pushing for Christianity across his empire. He also made sure to reform the church by focusing on educating the clergy and making sure they stuck to the religious teachings. After Charlemagne passed away in 814, his empire started to fall apart. His grandson split up the empire, which ended up causing it to break apart. Still, Charlemagne's impact as the one who brought Europe together and stood up for Christianity really shaped European history in a big way. People often view his reign as the starting point for the medieval political scene in Europe and the kickoff of the Holy Roman Empire. Al-Khwarizmi, the dad of algebra. Al-Khwarizmi was a Persian polymath from the 9th century, during the Islamic Golden Age. He's often called the father of algebra because of his groundbreaking contributions to mathematics. He really set the stage for so many fields in math and science. And you can still see his influence today in the word algorithm, which comes from a twist on his name. Al-Khwarizmi's work really shaped the fields of algebra, astronomy, geography, and trigonometry in a big way. Al-Khwarizmi was born in Khwarezm, which is now part of modern-day Uzbekistan. He spent a lot of his life in Baghdad, working as a scholar at the House of Wisdom, a key intellectual hub during the Abbasid Caliphate. His most famous work, Al-Kitab al-Mukhtasar fi Hizb al-Jabr wal-Muqabala, the compendious book on calculation by completion and balancing, is actually the source of the term algebra. This book offers a clear look at how to solve linear and quadratic equations, setting the stage for the algebra techniques we use today. Al-Khwarizmi had a pretty groundbreaking way of tackling equations back in his day. He tackled problems using both geometric and numerical methods, highlighting how crucial it is to complete and balance equations. Later on, his methods got translated into Latin, which opened the door for scholars in Europe and had a big impact on how mathematics developed in the Western world. Al-Khwarizmi did a lot more than just algebra. He also made important contributions to astronomy and geography. He focused on making precise astronomical tables and came up with an updated version of Ptolemy's Almagest. He also wrote a paper on how to calculate the Earth's circumference, which really helped people get a better grasp of geography during the medieval times. Al-Khwarizmi really played a key role in shaping what we know today about mathematics and science. His work in algebra and his contributions across different fields really established him as one of the key scholars during the Islamic Golden Age. His legacy still shapes modern mathematics, and his name is closely tied to logic, calculation, and mathematical reasoning. Auguste Comte, the father of sociology. Auguste Comte was born in France back in 1798. He's really well known as a philosopher and sociologist, mainly because he founded sociology and came up with the theory of positivism. Comte's ideas really shaped the way social science developed, and his work had a big influence on how we study society and approach the scientific method. He believed that society could really move forward by relying on scientific knowledge and rational thinking. Comte's most well-known work, Cours de philosophie positive, Course in Positive Philosophy, laid out his theory of positivism. He suggested that human knowledge evolves through 3 stages: the theological stage, the metaphysical stage, and the scientific or positive stage. Comte believed that society and individuals ought to be guided by scientific laws, much like the laws of nature. He thought that we could make progress by using empirical observation, experimentation, and reason. Comte's positivism aimed to shift away from religious and metaphysical views of the world, pushing for a more scientific way to understand human society. He talked about how crucial social order and stability are, thinking that a well-organized society could come from using scientific principles to tackle social and political problems. His ideas really played a big role in shaping modern sociology, and a lot of later sociologists, like Emil Durkheim, were influenced by Kant's work. Kant also came up with the idea of social physics, which was all about trying to understand and predict social happenings using the same techniques used in the physical sciences. He thought that just like natural sciences look into the laws of nature, sociology should dive into the laws of society. His work really set the stage for future studies in things like social psychology, social reform, and understanding social structures. Even though Kant's ideas stirred up some debate back in the day, there's no denying his role as the father of sociology. He really focused on scientific reasoning, using empirical data, and studying society in a systematic way, which played a big role in making sociology a recognized academic field. These days, Kant is seen as one of the key figures in the history of social science. So, Auguste Comte Hammurabi, the king of Babylon, Hammurabi, who came into the world around 1810 BCE, was the sixth king of the first Babylonian dynasty and held the throne from 1792 BCE to 1750 BCE. He's really famous for coming up with the Code of Hammurabi, which is one of the earliest and most complete written legal codes we have in human history. His time in power really pushed forward the way laws and governance were developed, not only in Babylon but also for many ancient civilizations. Hammurabi took the throne of Babylon when the city-state was really surrounded by some strong neighbors. He expanded the Babylonian Empire through military campaigns, diplomacy, and strategic alliances, bringing a large part of Mesopotamia under his control. His empire turned into one of the strongest in the area, and his leadership brought a sense of stability to the land. Hammurabi's code is definitely his most significant legacy. They carved the code onto a big stone pillar and put it out in public spots for everyone to check out. There are 282 laws that touch on all sorts of topics, like family issues, business deals, work rules, and criminal justice. The laws were all about the idea of an eye for an eye, aiming to keep things fair and just in Babylonian society, even though the punishments in the code might come off as pretty tough by today's standards. Those laws actually created a steady legal framework that played a big role in keeping things in order. Hammurabi's time is pretty interesting, especially when you think about how he helped build up infrastructure. He constructed canals, temples, and fortifications, which really boosted the economic and military power of his empire. He made some changes to the way things were run, which really helped make governance smoother. Plus, he set up a system of governors to take care of the different provinces in his huge empire. Hammurabi's code had a big impact on later legal systems, and people still look at it today as a prime example of early attempts to put laws into writing. His legacy as a ruler who aimed to bring order and justice to his empire sticks around in history, and what he did really set the stage for future legal systems all over the globe. Cyrus McCormick, the guy who revolutionized farming. Cyrus McCormick was born in 1809 in Virginia. He was an American inventor and entrepreneur who really changed the game in agriculture with his invention of the mechanical reaper. His invention really changed the game for farming, boosting productivity and playing a big role in feeding the growing population in the 19th century. McCormick's work is seen as a big step forward in agricultural innovation, and his impact is still felt in the industry today. Before McCormick came along, harvesting grain was a tough job that needed a lot of workers to cut the crops by hand using sickles or scythes. Back in the early 1830s, McCormick started tinkering with a machine designed to make harvesting a whole lot easier. After years of trying out different ideas, he got a patent for the mechanical reaper in 1834. This invention really cut down the time and effort required to harvest grain. The reaper was a game changer for farming, able to cut and gather crops way quicker than people could do by hand. It really stood out as one of the key inventions of the 19th century. Back in 1847, McCormick started the McCormick Harvesting Machine Company, which eventually became part of International Harvester, one of the biggest names in agricultural equipment around the globe. His company played a big role in getting the mechanical reaper out there across the United States, and even further, changing how farming was done and helping agriculture grow in the American Midwest. McCormick's invention really changed the game for the agricultural industry, helping farmers work larger plots of land with fewer hands on deck. This innovation was super important for the industrialization of agriculture and helped big farming operations take off. It also helped the American economy grow and supported the country's capacity to feed a quickly increasing population. Alongside his work in agriculture, McCormick was also a philanthropist, lending his support to educational institutions and various charitable causes. His legacy as an inventor and businessman really made a mark on the agricultural sector, and his mechanical reaper is seen as one of the key inventions in farming history. King Solomon, the smart and fair leader, King Solomon, who was the son of King David, served as the third and last king of the United Kingdom of Israel, ruling from about 970 BCE to 931 BCE. Solomon is really famous for his wisdom, his wealth, and all those impressive building projects he took on, like the first temple in Jerusalem. That temple ended up being a key symbol for Jewish identity and worship. People often view his reign as a time of prosperity and peace in the history of the Israelites. Solomon's wisdom is pretty legendary, right? People say he was famous all over the ancient world for his knack for making fair and insightful decisions. One of the well-known tales about his wisdom involves a situation with two women who both claimed to be the mother of the same child. So, Solomon suggested splitting the baby in half, but the real mom quickly stepped up and said she'd rather give up her claim than see her child harmed. Solomon, seeing her genuine motherhood, gave her the child, showing just how well he understood human nature. Solomon's wealth and prosperity really play a big role in his legacy. He set up trade routes with nearby kingdoms, bringing in wealth and luxury to his own kingdom. He teamed up with strong nations like Egypt and Phoenicia, and he put that wealth to good use by funding big building projects. The first temple in Jerusalem is probably the most well-known of these constructions, and it turned into a sacred site for the Israelites. During Solomon's reign, he also wrote several books in the Bible, like Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Solomon. These works are packed with wisdom and moral lessons, and a lot of them still have a big impact on religious and philosophical ideas today. Even with all his wisdom and accomplishments, Solomon faced some tough times in his later years. His wealth and connections sometimes got a bit out of hand, and after he passed away, the kingdom of Israel ended up splitting into two parts. Solomon's legacy as a wise and just ruler is still celebrated in Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions. Carl Linnaeus, the guy who started modern taxonomy. Carl Linnaeus was born in 1707 in Sweden and is known as a groundbreaking scientist. He's the guy who laid the groundwork for modern taxonomy, which is all about naming, describing, and classifying living organisms. His amazing work in organizing the natural world really set the stage for biology, and the classification system he created is still being used today. Linnaeus is really famous for coming up with the binomial nomenclature system. This system gives each species a two-part Latin name that includes both the genus and the species. This system offered a consistent method for naming organisms, making it simpler for scientists to chat about and sort through the incredible variety of life on our planet. So, humans are known as Homo sapiens, where Homo is the genus and sapiens is the species. Linnaeus didn't just focus on classification. He also grouped plants and animals into different levels based on what they had in common. His big work, Systema Naturae, came out in 1735 and sorted out animals, plants, and minerals, setting up a system that would be used for ages. His system set up a framework for studying biodiversity and has really helped move forward the areas of ecology, evolution, and genetics. Linnaeus didn't just focus on taxonomy. He also had a big impact on botany and zoology. He's known for classifying thousands of plant and animal species and publishing a bunch of works that really helped to broaden scientific knowledge. He really focused on systematic observation and classification, which set the stage for future discoveries in biology. Linnaeus's system really changed the game for studying living organisms and had a huge impact on how modern biology developed. His contributions to classification have really made a difference, and his legacy still influences how scientists organize and study life on our planet. Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, Margaret Thatcher, who came into the world in 1925, served as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1979 to 1990, making history as the first woman to take on that role. During her time in office, she made some pretty significant changes to economic and social policies, which is why people started calling her the Iron Lady. Thatcher's leadership and policies really shaped the UK and the world. making her one of the most talked about and influential figures in modern British history. Thatcher took the reins when the UK was facing some serious economic challenges, like soaring inflation, rising unemployment, and a lot of union unrest. As Prime Minister, she rolled out a bunch of economic reforms that leaned on free market ideas. This included privatizing state-owned industries, cutting back on regulations, and lowering taxes. So, these policies, which we call Thatcherism, were all about cutting back on government involvement in the economy and encouraging people to take charge of their own businesses. Some folks really cheered her on for giving the British economy a boost, but others pointed out that her policies seemed to make social inequality worse and created tough times for a lot of working-class people. Thatcher's foreign policy really stood out. 2. She was a crucial figure in the Falklands War back in 1982. Guiding Britain to victory over Argentina and really establishing herself as a strong and determined leader. She had a pretty close bond with U.S. President Ronald Reagan and was a strong advocate for the Cold War approach of standing up to the Soviet Union. Even with all her accomplishments, Thatcher's time in charge definitely stirred up some debate. Her strong position on things like trade unions, social welfare, and Europe sparked a lot of protests and pushback. In 1990, after a time when her popularity was slipping, she stepped down as Prime Minister, having guided the UK through one of the most significant changes in its recent history. Margaret Thatcher left behind a legacy that's all about strong leadership and bold reforms. But it also sparked a lot of division and debate. People are still chatting about her impact on British politics and the world stage. But one thing's for sure, she'll always be seen as a pioneer for women in politics and a powerful player in global matters. Attila the Hun, the scourge of God, Attila the Hun, who came into the world around 406 CE, was the head honcho of the Huns, a group that really struck fear into the hearts of many during the late Roman Empire. He was in charge from 434 CE until he passed away in 453 CE, and is known as one of the most powerful and ruthless leaders of his era. His empire reached all the way from Central Asia to Eastern Europe and the borders of the Roman Empire, which really made him a powerful figure in history. Attila started off sharing his reign with his brother Bleda, but once Bleda passed away in 445 CE, Attila took over as the one and only ruler of the Huns. He guided his people with unmatched military expertise, and his battles against the Eastern and Western Roman empires were truly impactful. Attila went on some pretty intense raids that left a lot of destruction in their wake. The Romans even started calling him the Scourge of God because they viewed him as a sort of divine punishment for their own excesses. With Attila at the helm, the Huns really made their mark as a powerful force in Europe. They went on raids and took over large areas, looting cities and making the Roman Empire cough up a lot of tribute for some peace. Attila had this approach that combined surprise attacks, a bit of psychological warfare, and the intense fear he created in his foes. One of his most well-known battles was the Battle of the Catalonian Plains in 451 CE, where he went up against a mix of Roman and Visigothic forces. Even though he had to pull back, there's no denying his strength and skill in the military. Even though he had a violent and aggressive side, Attila was quite the clever diplomat too. He managed to work out peace treaties with the Romans, usually getting some pretty good terms. But after he passed away in 453 CE, his empire fell apart pretty quickly because his sons just didn't have the leadership skills to keep it all together. Attila is remembered as a really fearsome conqueror. Even though his empire didn't last long, the impact of his power and the fear he created in his enemies stuck around for centuries. He's definitely one of the most legendary military leaders in history. Mikhail Gorbachev, the guy behind the changes, Mikhail Gorbachev, who came into the world in 1931 in the Soviet Union, was the last leader of the Soviet Union and had a key part in its breakup. During his time in office from 1985 to 1991, there were some pretty significant changes happening in the Soviet Union. His policies of glasnost, which means openness, and perestroika, or restructuring, stirred up a mix of hope and chaos. Gorbachev's legacy is pretty complicated. On one hand, people see him as a reformer, but on the other, he gets a lot of criticism for his part in the Soviet Union's collapse. Gorbachev stepped into power during a period when the Soviet Union was really struggling with serious economic and political issues. The Soviet economy was really struggling, and the political system was pretty inflexible and not very effective. Gorbachev thought that the only way to rescue the Soviet Union was by making some changes. So, back in 1985, he took on the role of General Secretary of the Communist Party and jumped right in with his ideas for change. His glasnost policy aimed to promote more freedom of speech and make politics more transparent. It gave people the chance to share their thoughts and critique the government without worrying about any backlash. This openness sparked a lot of discussions that were once off limits regarding the Soviet system and its shortcomings. But it also brought to light the corruption and inefficiencies that were lurking within the government. Perestroika was Gorbachev's plan to shake things up in the Soviet economy by bringing in some market-like reforms, even though it aimed to spread out control, promote private businesses, and bring in a bit of competition. The reforms faced pushback from the Communist Party and ended up not being able to boost the economy. Gorbachev was really important in bringing the Cold War to a close. He was open to chatting with Western leaders, especially U.S. Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush, which really helped ease the tensions between the superpowers. He really made a difference by focusing on cutting down nuclear arms and pulling Soviet troops out of Afghanistan, which helped calm things down around the world. But Gorbachev's reforms ended up having some unexpected effects. The Soviet Union started to break apart, as nationalistic movements in Eastern Europe and within the Soviet republics began to pick up steam. So, back in 1991, there was this failed coup by some hardliners, and that led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev ended up resigning too. Even though his political career has wrapped up, the impact he made as a reformer and his part in the peaceful conclusion of the Cold War will stick around for a long time. Queen Victoria, the symbol of a time. Queen Victoria was born in 1819 and ruled the United Kingdom from 1837 until she passed away in 1901. Her time on the throne, called the Victorian era, was one of the longest in British history and brought about huge political, social, and cultural shifts. Victoria really represented the strength and reach of the British Empire, and her time saw some major advancements in science, industry, and the growth of the empire itself. Victoria became queen when she was just 18, following the passing of her uncle, King William IV. Her time in power was marked by a phase of stability and prosperity for the British Empire. Thanks to her leadership, the empire grew to its biggest size, covering huge areas in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. During her reign, the British Empire emerged as the leading colonial power, and in 1876, Victoria was declared the Empress of India. The Victorian era really stood out for its fast-paced industrial growth. The Industrial Revolution, starting in the late 18th century, really picked up speed during Victoria's reign. Technological advancements like the steam engine and the telegraph really changed the game for society. The middle class really started to grow. Cities became more populated, and factories began to pop up everywhere. All of this changed the British economy in a big way. Queen Victoria really stood out as a symbol of morality and propriety. People really admired her personal life, especially her strong devotion to her husband, Prince Albert. It was often viewed as a great example of family values. Her strong sense of duty and moral conduct really shaped British society and set the tone for what was expected socially during that time. But, her time in power definitely had its ups and downs. The British Empire dealt with various conflicts, like the Crimean War and the Indian Rebellion of 1857. New political ideologies like socialism and labor movements started to shake up the traditional power structures. Queen Victoria's reign really shaped British history in a big way. Her legacy really stands out with its stability, imperial grandeur, and cultural transformation. And you can still see her influence in British society today. Niels Bohr, the pioneer of quantum theory. Niels Bohr was born in 1885 in Copenhagen, Denmark. He became one of the most influential scientists of the 20th century and is often seen as the father of quantum theory. His work in atomic structure and quantum mechanics really helped shape how we understand physics today and set the stage for a lot of the tech advancements that came after. Bohr's most well-known contribution was his model of the atom, which he came up with in 1913. The Bohr model describes how electrons orbit the nucleus in specific paths or shells. Bohr's model was a game-changer compared to earlier models. Instead of thinking of electrons as always moving around, it suggested that they can only be found in specific energy levels, or quantum states. So, when an electron jumps between these levels, it either gives off or takes in a certain amount of energy. This discovery changed how scientists viewed atomic behavior and set the stage for quantum mechanics. Besides his work on atomic structure, Bohr really helped shape the development of quantum mechanics too. He played a key role in shaping the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, which suggests that particles can exist in several states simultaneously until someone observes them. This bold idea shook up classical physics and sparked some deep discussions about what reality really is. Bohr's impact reached far beyond just the lab. He was an important person in the scientific community and was involved in the Manhattan Project, contributing to the development of nuclear weapons during World War II. Even though he was part of the project, Bohr really pushed for peace and believed in using scientific discoveries responsibly. Later on, he became a strong supporter of nuclear disarmament and really pushed for international cooperation in science. Niels Bohr picked up a bunch of awards throughout his life, and one of the big ones was the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1922. His work still inspires physicists today, and his contributions to understanding the atom and quantum mechanics have really shaped the modern world. Ramses II, the amazing pharaoh of Egypt, Ramses II, often referred to as Ramses the Great, was one of the most influential and renowned pharaohs in ancient Egypt. He was born in 1303 BCE and took the throne in 1279 BCE, ruling for an impressive 66 years, which makes him one of the longest reigning pharaohs in Egyptian history. Ramses II is seen as one of Egypt's top rulers because of his military successes, impressive building projects, and attempts to grow Egypt's territory. Ramses II is probably most famous for his military campaigns, especially his fights with the Hittites. One of the most well-known events during his reign was the Battle of Kadesh, which took place in 1274 BCE. Even though the battle ended in a tie, Ramses made it seem like a huge win, and this story was later carved into the walls of temples all over Egypt. His military wins helped Egypt keep hold of its lands and really boosted his image as a warrior king. Ramses II wasn't just a military genius. He was also an incredible builder. He built a bunch of temples, monuments, and statues, and a lot of them are still well-known symbols of ancient Egypt today. One of his most well-known projects is the Temple of Abu Simbel, where you can see those massive statues of Ramses himself. This impressive show of power and wealth was meant to wow both his subjects and foreign visitors, solidifying his status as a god king. Ramses II really put a lot of effort into diplomacy and building peaceful relationships with the neighboring kingdoms. Back in 1258 BCE, he actually signed a peace treaty with the Hittites. It's pretty cool because it's one of the earliest examples of a document like that in history. This treaty brought lasting peace between the two powers and really showed off Ramses' diplomatic skills. Ramses II's time on the throne was a real golden age for Egypt. His leadership really brought prosperity, stability, and lasting fame to Egypt. People remembered him as a godlike ruler even long after he was gone. His legacy lives on in the impressive buildings he created and in the tales and legends that have grown around his time as ruler. Emiliano Zapata, the advocate for land reforms. Emiliano Zapata was born in 1879 in Morelos, Mexico, and he's known as a key figure in the Mexican Revolution. He really made a mark by standing up for the rights of peasants and pushing for land reforms. Zapata's strong dedication to social justice and land redistribution really made him a symbol of resistance against the oppressive forces of his time. Zapata grew up in a family of peasant farmers, and right from the start, he saw the tough realities of rural poverty and how indigenous Mexicans were exploited. His experiences really influenced his political views, and by the time he hit his 20s, he was getting involved in local uprisings against the harsh policies of big landowners and the government. He went with the slogan Tierra y Libertad, land and liberty, and it really caught on as the rallying cry for his army. Zapata took charge of the Liberation Army of the South, a revolutionary group that aimed to redistribute land to peasants and farmers. He really believed that the land should go to the people who actually worked it, and he put in a lot of effort to take on the established power systems that let rich landowners hold on to huge estates while the peasants struggled to get by. Zapata led with a mix of smart military tactics and strong moral beliefs. Zapata may not have seen his vision fully come to life, But his movement definitely left a mark on Mexican society that still resonates today. His struggle for agrarian reform really connected with the larger Mexican Revolution, which aimed to tackle problems of inequality and social justice. Zapata is often seen as a symbol of standing up against oppression, and his push for land redistribution still inspires political movements globally. Zapata was assassinated in 1919, but his legacy continues to resonate in Mexican culture as a symbol of the fight for justice, land rights, and social equality. Alan Turing, the guy who started modern computing. Alan Turing was born in 1912 in Maida Vale, London. He was a British mathematician, logician, and cryptanalyst, and many people see him as the father of modern computing and artificial intelligence. Turing did some amazing work that really set the stage for computers and played a big role in shaping our digital world. In 1936, Turing made a huge impact on mathematics and computer science when he published his paper about the idea of the Turing machine. This abstract math idea laid the groundwork for creating algorithms and understanding computational theory. It offered a way to think about the boundaries of computation, and its ideas are still key to computer science today. So, during World War II, Turing was super important to the Allies. He worked at Bletchley Park, leading a team of cryptanalysts who cracked the German Enigma code. His efforts in breaking the code are recognized for helping to end the war sooner and for saving many lives. Turing's work in cryptography was a bit of a secret for a long time, and it wasn't until later that people really started to recognize what he did during the war. Turing didn't just work in mathematics and cryptography. He also made some early strides in artificial intelligence. Back in 1950, he came out with this groundbreaking paper called Computing Machinery and Intelligence. In it, he introduced the well-known Turing test, which was all about figuring out if a machine could show intelligent behavior that was just like a human's. It's really sad that Turing's life had so much personal suffering. He faced persecution for being homosexual, which was against the law in Britain back then. And in 1952, he underwent chemical castration. Turing passed away in 1954, and it's thought that it may have been a suicide, but his legacy lives on. Back in 2013, Queen Elizabeth II granted a posthumous pardon to Turing, and today, he's celebrated as one of the key figures in the history of science and technology. Alfred Nobel, the guy who invented dynamite and started the Nobel Prizes. Alfred Nobel was born in 1833 in Stockholm, Sweden. He was quite the multi-talented guy, chemist, engineer, inventor, and industrialist. Most people know him for inventing dynamite, even though his invention made him incredibly rich. It got him thinking about the moral side of what he was doing. This reflection eventually motivated him to create the Nobel Prizes, which are now considered some of the most prestigious awards globally. Nobel had a fascinating early life, filled with a strong passion for science and technology. He explored chemistry and engineering in different countries, and by the time he was 29, he had already racked up more than 350 patents for his inventions. Dynamite, his most famous invention, really changed the game for industries like construction and mining. It made handling explosives a lot safer and more efficient. But, the invention also caused a lot of destruction in wars, and Nobel started to worry about how his creation could be misused. Back in 1888, Alfred Nobel's brother Ludwig died, and a French newspaper accidentally published an obituary for Alfred instead. The headline read, "The Merchant of Death is dead." Nobel was really impacted by this negative view of his life and work, which made him think twice about how he wanted to be remembered. He chose to use the huge fortune he had built up from his inventions to support the Nobel Prizes, which would recognize accomplishments in areas like physics, chemistry, medicine, literature, and peace. Nobel decided to set up the prizes so that his name would be linked to positive contributions to humanity instead of the harmful effects of explosives. He set up a trust to manage most of his fortune for the prizes, and the very first Nobel Prizes were given out in 1901, just 5 years after he passed away. These days, the Nobel Prizes still celebrate people who have really made a difference in various areas for humanity. Nobel's legacy really blends scientific innovation with a strong commitment to promoting peace and human progress. Suleiman, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Suleiman the Magnificent, who came into the world in 1494, served as the 10th Sultan of the Ottoman Empire and is frequently seen as one of its most remarkable leaders. His reign, from 1520 to 1566, was a time when the Ottoman Empire really hit its stride in terms of political, military, and cultural influence. Suleiman really made his mark with his leadership and reforms, and people remember him as a visionary ruler. Suleiman took the throne in 1520 and soon showed everyone that he was a skilled and driven leader. He led military campaigns that grew the empire's territory, reaching into Europe, Africa, and Asia. With him in charge, the Ottoman Empire expanded to cover a big chunk of the Mediterranean, reaching places like Hungary, Iraq, and some areas in North Africa. He didn't just win battles, he also had a knack for building diplomatic relationships and getting peace treaties sorted out. Suleiman is also recognized for his legal reforms. Alongside his military achievements, he put in place a bunch of laws called the Canon that covered different parts of life in the Ottoman Empire, like trade, taxes, and criminal justice. He made some legal changes to promote fairness and efficiency in the empire, which is why people started calling him the lawgiver. Suleiman really had a knack for supporting the arts and architecture. While he was in charge, the Ottoman Empire went through a cultural renaissance, seeing some impressive progress in literature, music, and art. He had a hand in creating a bunch of amazing architectural feats, like the well-known Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul. Even with all his achievements, Suleiman ran into some tough times later on, dealing with issues from within and threats from outside. He was definitely an iconic figure in Ottoman history, recognized for his vision, military skills, and his impact on law and culture. People often look back at his reign as a golden age for the Ottoman Empire. Harriet Tubman, the conductor of the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman was born in 1822 in Maryland. She was an African-American abolitionist, humanitarian, and a former slave who became one of the most well-known conductors of the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman showed incredible bravery and determination, making her a true icon of resistance against slavery. She's celebrated as one of the most influential figures in American history. Born into slavery, Tubman faced the harsh realities of that life from an early age. After breaking free from slavery in 1849, she had the chance to enjoy her freedom, but she decided to go back to the South to assist other enslaved individuals in their escape. Tubman put her life on the line time and again to guide others to freedom via the Underground Railroad, which was a series of hidden paths and safe spots that assisted slaves in escaping to free states and Canada. Tubman is thought to have completed about 13 trips back to the South, assisting more than 70 slaves in their journey to freedom. She really showed incredible courage and resourcefulness in her work as a conductor. She had a bunch of clever tricks up her sleeve to stay under the radar, like moving around at night and using codes to chat with the folks she was helping out. During the Civil War, Tubman took on the roles of a scout and nurse for the Union Army. She made history as the first woman to lead an armed expedition in the war, guiding a raid that freed more than 700 slaves in South Carolina. After the war, Tubman kept pushing for justice and equality. She really got involved in supporting women's suffrage. Sun Tzu, the brilliant mind behind ancient Chinese strategy. Sun Tzu is a legendary military strategist and philosopher, and he's most famous for his influential book, The Art of War. This work has become a key reference for military strategy and offers valuable insights that apply to many areas beyond just warfare, like business, leadership, and personal growth. Sun Tzu was born in the 6th century BC, and his life and writings have really shaped the thoughts and strategies of military leaders and thinkers for many years. Sun Tzu's philosophy is all about the idea that all warfare is based on deception. It really highlights how crucial strategy, preparation, and knowing your enemy are. The Art of War is a guide that talks about military strategy, highlighting ideas such as being adaptable, using surprise to your advantage, and the role of psychological tactics. His thoughts on leadership and strategy can really be applied to more than just warfare. They also fit well with negotiations, competition, and personal growth. Even though we don't know a lot about Sun Tzu's life, his teachings have really made a lasting impression. Military commanders like Napoleon Bonaparte and generals from both world wars have put his principles into action. These days, you'll find that the Art of War is a go-to resource for business leaders, entrepreneurs, and political figures who are looking to get a leg up in competitive situations. Sun Tzu's impact goes beyond just military strategy. His work really stands out as a symbol of wisdom, and you can see how his ideas keep shaping different parts of life, whether it's in diplomacy or corporate strategy. His teachings show us that success isn't only about sheer strength. It's also about being smart, flexible, and seeing the whole picture. These days, people see Sun Tzu as one of the top strategists in history, and his ideas still hold a lot of value for helping both individuals and organizations find success.